Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. As usual, we're going to do a quick sound check. So let me get, please, let me get A1 in the chat room. A1 in the chat room if you can hear me. All right. Got five people in. And let me get a one if you can hear me on this inaugural, first time ever, first number one, part one, episode one. All right. Thank you very much, the unspecialist. Thank you very much. Seems that we have sound, and that is a good thing. That is a good thing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the format here, as I'm starting to find out, is to do a quick prologue and then play some music. Okay, play another one of my tracks. Today we're gonna play Battle Within. Okay, that's always a winner. Shout out to BC, was it BSC? Nicer, A, Zen Yi, Lord Sashomaru. Making major profits. Shout out to you guys. Shout out to you guys. Okay, I was asked in the comment section, or comment section, I should say, to do something that involves books. There were two separate comments. One person said, consider a book club, right? Perhaps on particular topics. Another person also said, how about sharing ideas about the books that you are reading? Okay, the books that you are reading. All right. And I said, you know what? That's not a bad idea. I'm going to start a series on the books that I read. And today we're going to be talking about The World as Will and Idea. It is a philosophy book, pure philosophy from the metaphysics end of things. And I will try to do a book review slash something a little bit more expository of the ideas in the book and the general genre. Now, books on metaphysics are not necessarily the most popular books out there. And the entire genre is not one where people indulge in, typically speaking, especially books written in the 1800s, right? So today we're talking about The World as Will and Idea by Authur Schopenhauer. Authur Schopenhauer lived in the 1800s, was a German philosopher, and he was quite influential to people like Nietzsche, right? Nietzsche, we know that name. He's a popular guy. Most people haven't read him, but everyone has heard of him. Now, Authur Schopenhauer was one of the people that inspired Nietzsche, and that definitely helps position him in our minds vis-a-vis the pantheon of philosophy. Now, this book talks about the world as will and idea. And if I were to try to encapsulate what that mainly means, is that we see the world in two ways. Number one is an idea, which is a representation, which is every object is a object to a subject. Okay. You don't know the sun, you only know the eyes that see the sun. You don't know the earth, you only know a hand that touches the earth. You have never experienced anything outside of your subject. You have never experienced anything, any object outside of the subject. So the subject and the object come together. There is no need to separate it from this point of view. And this point of view is called idealism, which takes the consciousness as primary. In other words, you have never experienced anything outside of your graphical user interface. All right. To give an example, using the graphical user interface idea, you see a trash can on your desktop, okay? The recycling bin. We know it's not really a trash can, right? Behind that is zeros and ones and electronic gates that control all that stuff. So all objects you see goes this idea, and it's a bastardization right now, okay? I'm giving you just the general flow of it. Idealism basically says that everything you see is seen through the graphical user interface. Okay, you see the sun, but the sun, as far as you're concerned, as far as you'll ever know, may just be, or as a matter of fact, is just like your trash can on your desktop. The trash can, you can't really tell what it is unless you know what's behind the scenes. And there's No way of going behind the scenes. So that's the idea or representation part. The world as will and representation. And then there's the other part, which is the will, which we'll get into. Okay. This was just a short, brief prologue before we play the music, a short, brief prologue to let people come in. And then we're going to play the song Battle Within. And then we're going to get started on this book review slash expository. Okay. And we'll talk about, I'll open up the stream as well. It's going to be an open panel for anyone that wishes to join in, ask questions. Okay, and this will be a general introduction into the kinds of books that I read. I'm quite interested in philosophy, original, real philosophy, metaphysics, so on and so forth. So, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we just go ahead and enjoy Battle Within? Battle Within. That's going to be my theme song, unless I want to share something different with you guys. So, let's get it.
On the shore, relentless in the war, the legions in our hearts, shed waters in our balls, the spirit and the flesh, the emotions that arrest, the cerebral will contest, propelling the unrest. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand, stand up, make we burn Babylon. Guess I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. With the semblance of a blaze, with gratitude and rage, we touch another page with delirious delight, impervious to light. This vitality and might encourages the flight. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand. Stand up, make we burn Babylon. Guess I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Guess I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within.
Yes. And we're back. And forgive me, but I have to ask you to put another one in the chat if you can hear me, because still getting used to the different audio settings, going from the music to the camera to the sharing and so on and so forth. So let me get a one in the chat if you can hear my voice now. And welcome as you guys come in. Don't forget, please, to hit the like button, ladies and gentlemen, as you come in. Oh, thank you very much, Commandant Lou. I see the one on that. So that means that I am being heard. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural stream of book reviews. Book review stream. And if you like the song that you heard go ahead and check it out. Free on SoundCloud. Okay. As a matter of fact, other songs are there, but this song, Battle Within, has not been recorded yet. So, mods, please go ahead and share these links periodically. And also, don't forget to support on the Cash App. Don't forget to support on the Cash App. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about this book right here. Okay? This book right here. And it is by Authur Schopenhauer. It is called The World as Will and Representation, or The World as Will and Idea. The world as will and representation, or the world as will and idea. So let's go ahead and get right into this. What I intend to do here is to give it, rather than just being a book review, okay, which I'm not an expert at, and I'm going to find out as we do these series. I'm going to need to see what this book review idea is about. But this is more about an exposition of the ideas in the book. And let's just start with who, okay? And I know I did a little prologue before, but there are more people coming in. Prologue before the music played. And now that there are more people in here, let me go ahead and start with who. Who is Authur Schopenhauer? Authur Schopenhauer is a German philosopher who lived in the 1800s. German philosopher that lived in the 1800s and one of the great influencers of Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay? And he is one of the kinds of philosophers that we call idealists. Now, idealists, when it comes to philosophy, is not what you might think it is. Idealists are people who keep the subject primary. In other words, subject or consciousness is primary. They are opposed to the realists. And the realists, like you may imagine, tend to put the primary emphasis on the external reality. Okay? So that's who Authur Schopenhauer is. Now, what is this book about? Okay, I said Authur Schopenhauer, who is he? He is a 19th century, which means he lived in the 1800s. Okay, philosopher, he's an idealist. Okay, fine, that means subject is primary. But what? What is this book about? This book called The World as Will and Representation, which I am highly recommending to you. It's one of my favorite books. Okay, one of my favorite books. And I really like the book because Authur Schopenhauer is a very, very, very good writer. Okay, so he has the wit, the smooth prose, a little bit of that edge, a little bit of that bitterness, for his contemporary and perhaps past rivals, that makes a great read. Very similar to Friedrich Nietzsche in that regard. Very, very similar to Friedrich Nietzsche in that regard. And ladies and gentlemen, behind the scenes, give a little behind the scenes. I got one of these. Okay, I upgraded to this lavalier mic, which it's still the same Rode GoPro thing, but I'm using this piece now, which basically, fits into the little jacket thing there. I hope it sounds good. And behind the scenes stuff, some better lighting there. All right, got to work on the lighting as well. But ladies and gentlemen, I was saying that Authur Schopenhauer is a very, very good writer, and that is why, in addition to the fact that I generally do love metaphysics, which we'll get into in terms of what exactly metaphysics is as a branch of philosophy. But I like Authur Schopenhauer because of all the metaphysicians that there are. He is a very, very good writer, and he can expose and expound upon ideas in a way that is very natural, very intuitive, slick prose, okay, head turning, witty stuff. Very, very nice guy, okay? Now, what is the world as will and idea? Okay, what is this book about? It says over here, the world as will and representation. Let's just call it rep. Okay. I've shown the book. Now I'm going to go ahead and put it down so I can have some room to do some writing over here. Now, basically, the idea behind the book is this, and then we'll break it down a little further. We'll go in depth and so on and so forth. But the basic idea is this: we experience the world as a subject. And I already kind of said that he is a Russian idealist, meaning that they put the experience of the world as primary. In other words, you cannot be talking about the sun and the moon and the earth and all these things without first noticing that, hey, the only way in which it appears to you is as an experience, as an object to a subject. There is never an object without an observer. There is never an object without a subject. And that to try to separate these two things might be foolish. Let me get a one in the chat if this idea, which so far is the kind of position of the word idealism, okay? The sound fades when you turn. Perhaps, perhaps, hold on one second. Thank you for that. Maybe, convert, internal microphone. The sound fades when I turn this way, when I turn. All right, let me do this then. As Kevin Samuels would say, building it while we're flying it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this real quick. Thank you very much. And if you're hearing any ridiculous scratchy sounds or so on and so forth, like subject the mic so you can pick up your voice. Adjust the mic so you can pick up your voice. Yeah. Okay. Check microphone. Turn on microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies while I fix this here. Says internal. Plug in over here. And we got, okay. That'll do it. That will do it. All right. Figuring it out. Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me now? Let me get a one in the chat now if things are a little better. I think I did a boo-boo. I was trying out this thing for the first time, but I did not quite use the right connection. So next time I will come in and I will be ready with the new technology, but constantly upgrading, constantly upgrading over here. No wonder I couldn't hear the music earlier, but thank you very much. Thank you very much for letting me know that it was fading out, because it would have been a disaster, especially for those who will be watching the review, okay? And as you watch me here fidget with wires and make an ass of myself, I can continue to talk about basically the idea that, okay, idealism is about taking consciousness as primary. And I was asking you guys to give me a one in the chat if you understand what I mean by that. What I mean by consciousness being primary, by saying that the object is always tied to the subject, okay? And that trying to separate these two things might be a big blunder, if you will, okay? So let me get a one in the chat for that. The idea of idealism, object and subject, because it goes into this whole representation aspect of the world as will and representation, which is the book that we are reviewing today. Okay, we're reviewing that book, The World as Will and Representation, and I would like to know if you guys get the idea of idealism. Okay, we put that away. We'll figure this out later. Now, we view the world in a couple of ways, says this book. Generally speaking, the thesis is number one, it is an idea. In other words, it is matter for consciousness. That the world appears to you, okay, and that's the point. It appears to you. It is not something that you can state other than to mention that it appears to you. You cannot say that the world necessarily is without talking about the fact that it appears to you. Okay? So we experience the world phenomenologically as a set of phenomena that are objects to a subject. There's always the subject. There is no need to talk about anything other than the fact that there is a subject. Now that's the representation part. Okay? The representation part, which I put over in the wrong side, basically says that the world appears to you as idea. Now, that idea may be a little bit of a confusing word, but basically what he's trying to say is that, and it's a little confusing because it's a German translation, basically. Okay? A German translation of the word, which basically means an appearance, almost like a vision. And the mirror on which that, or the canvas on which that vision appears, cannot be neglected. The canvas is the subject and it cannot be neglected. So take everything you experience as that. Now, why are we even talking about this? Why are we talking about, well, the world and how it appears to us and so on and so forth? Well, this is because philosophy goes like this. There's something called metaphysics, and metaphysics is about what exists. Meta means beyond or underneath, what undergirds, okay? And physics is what you think it is, right? Physics being matter, the material world, what is, but what underlies it? So the question about, let's say, for example, are we living in a simulation is a metaphysical question. The question of whether this is real or this is the matrix is a metaphysical question. Hence, metaphysics is that branch of philosophy which talks about what is, what exists, okay? And what is the nature of what exists? What can we say about the reality of what exists? Shout out to Ramil Amir, okay? So again, that is why we're asking ourselves this question. We're asking ourselves the question of how can I talk about what exists? Okay? And this book, this big book right here, which is just one of the volumes written by this guy, okay, is saying, look, I'm going to break it down to you in this way. The world is will and representation. And so far, we've been talking about the representation part, which is that the world is object to a subject, that you can never, and perhaps you should never, separate the fact that there is always a subject, that whatever you see is something that you actually see. It appears to you, okay? And you should not ever separate the fact that it appears to you, and don't try to give it a reality outside of the fact that it appears to you, okay? Now, this immediately, when it comes out, where the first time people might hear it, they may think, well, it smacks of a little bit of over subjectivity, or what do you mean that the world really exists in my head? What we're saying is this. We're saying, Authur Schopenhauer is saying, okay, and this is independent of whether I agree with what's being said or not. I'm going to talk from the first person perspective when expounding or talking about these ideas, okay? That's just the best way to do it. So I'm going to represent the ideas as though I was the one writing the book, okay? And I'll talk about, well, maybe this, maybe that, how about this, how about that, right? But the idea here basically is the world is will and representation. The representation part is the fact that just as you see, again, the icon on your desktop, okay? And let me try to make this super real here by sharing my screen, okay?
Just the same way you see, let me see, hopefully you guys don't okay, the same way you see this trash can, recycling bin icon, right? In this graphical user interface, right? You know for sure that this is not a trash can though. It's not a trash can, right? It is a representation of certain things that will happen. It tells you that if you take this file, okay, and you dump it in here, it'll get deleted. So it is a representation of possibilities, it's a representation of action, a representation of potential, of functionality, and so on and so forth. The same way, the idea that the world is representation is basically saying, hey, the world is represented to you, to your consciousness. It's always object to a subject. And your graphical interface is space, time, causality, which are metaphysical. And then there is other metalogical, in other words, things that you already know, like the law of contradiction and so on and so forth. In other words, you come built in with a graphical user interface, just like this is a graphical user interface, okay? But that you don't really know what's behind this object that you see. This object that I see and I touch right now is just like the trash can on this desktop. But for the desktop, I know, okay, well, really, it's not that it's a trash can. I know what's behind it. I know that it's zeros and ones, and I know that behind that zeros and ones is a bunch of, let's say, logic gates and, well, electronics, let's just say, right? That I know. I know that for the case of my computer user interface. But I cannot know that for anything else. In other words, I cannot know that for this pen. I cannot know that for the sun. In other words, what really is behind this pen? What is this pen? What does it feel like to be the pen? What is the nature of reality and existence? Okay. This book begins by saying the nature is that it appears to you, and that you should perhaps stop there and really examine the nature of your consciousness and how it interplays with the objects that it is the subject of. Okay, that every object comes along with a subject. That you observe the sun, you observe the sun, you observe the sun, you observe the sun, I observe the sun. And there is no such thing as just sun without somebody observing it. This is not talking about whether the sun exists or not. What we're talking about is existence is always comes along with a subject, always comes along with a consciousness. And to try to get out of that box of, oh, but how about it just existing by itself? What is the nature of the inside? That's when the will side comes in, okay? So again, the book is called The World as Will and Representation. The world as will and representation. The representation part we just expounded upon, which is that every observation is always an object to a subject. Everything you see appears to you. You cannot separate your consciousness from it because it never appears without your consciousness, does it? I think it's a rather simple, axiomatic fact that it can be stated a priori and it can be stated to be solidly true. In other words, we have not said anything that is outlandish. All we have said, so the book goes. And let me turn down the sensitivity of this here. I think that's better. Okay, good. That's better. Sensitivity of the microphone turned down. Now, the world appears to you that you don't know the sun, you just know the eyes that see the sun. You don't know this pen, you just know the hand that feels the pen. You know the experience of the pen, and that there is no such thing as talking about pen without experiencing of the pen. There is no such thing as talking about objects without the subject. Okay? Again, idealists come from the point of view that the consciousness is primary, as opposed to the realists who put a lot of weight on the external world.
The idealists say, hey, you need to pay attention to the consciousness. Again, pay attention to the consciousness. And then we're asking ourselves, okay, we're talking about metaphysics. Okay, metaphysics is the study of what is. Metaphysics is the study of what is. Metaphysics is the study of what underlies physics. In other words, metaphysics. What's beyond physics, what's there. Okay? And things, by the way, just to give a little bit of a structure to philosophy, as I mentioned in the very beginning, not a lot of people study philosophy. It's not very common. Somebody asked me, what are the kind of books you read? Okay, I read all kinds of books, but my favorite subject, what I mainly am in terms of my student life, is a student of philosophy. Okay, because that undergirds everything else. So I do know, however, that not everybody is a student of philosophy. So I'm trying to break it down into chunks that are digestible, so on and so forth, as we do this book review. So metaphysics, which is the study of what is, what undergirds things. Then beyond that, you talk about how do you know what is, and that's called epistemology. How do we know things? Okay. And then everything else flows from there. Ethics, politics, aesthetics. What is the nature of the true, the good, and the beautiful, right? Flows from what is the nature of things to begin with. Okay. So you got metaphysics. And then from there, you have epistemology. What is number one, metaphysics. Epistemology is how do I know it? How can I study it? What is the nature of study? What's the nature of truth? And then what is the nature of the good? What is the good life? Okay. What kind of ethics? How should I live? Okay. So metaphysics defines the arena, and then politics, ethics, aesthetics, and everything else flows from that. Okay. So this might be perhaps the heaviest stream. Carl Black says, is metaphysics the same as occult or similar? No, no. A lot of people use it that way. A lot of people misuse and bastardize the word metaphysics. A lot of people just say, oh, well, it's metaphysical. Well, let me put it to you this way. Here's the reason why they do that. And here's the reason why you, Carl, may think that metaphysics has to do with the occult and stuff, is because it talks about things that underlie reality. So there are religious sects that also talk about things that underlie reality, right? So God underlies reality. So theology has a big metaphysical component, which is what is the nature of things? Well, things were created by God. What's the nature of God? What's the nature of reality? Okay. So metaphysics is about what is the nature of reality. And a lot of people, when they get into any kind of deep territory and woo-woo territory and BS territory, they pull out the word metaphysics because, again, they don't know what they're talking about. And that's fine. It's like I said yesterday in my yesterday's stream, a lot of the things I'm interested in are quite adjacent, that I am interested in are quite adjacent to a lot of the woo-woo stuff. But I hate the woo-woo stuff so much because it's adjacent to what I'm saying, but it's all just BS, it's all just nonsense, it's filled with idiots, so on and so forth. Okay. We're talking over here about real shit using real definitions, which are known by the real people. That way we're not left behind in the dust, because here is all about being better. Here being my channel is not for light lifting. It's about heavy lifting. It's about really doing and being better at the highest possible levels. We don't water shit down here, right? And I'm just making general statements here. I'm not talking to anyone in particular. But the idea here is, okay, we're going to study philosophy, at least in this particular book that I'm doing a review of today, at the highest level, at the highest level, at the most heavy we can lift, wherever your strength is at. That's where we're taking it. We're not watering it down. We're using real terms and so on and so forth. So yes, theology, the occult, and so on and so forth will have a metaphysical aspect, because all these things that have aesthetics, ethics, politics, what's the good life, they all need to have a metaphysical undergirding. Give me a 1, Mr. Carl Black, if you understand, or if I addressed your question. Let me get a 1 if I addressed your question Mr. Carl. Okay? And let me go ahead and see here. It seems like I'm signed up twice into this thing, and I would like to not be signed in twice. Definitely don't want to do that. Okay, remove that because I was a screen share. Remove, stop sharing that. Excellent. Boom. So to reiterate, interesting. That makes sense. The woo-woo BS has bastardized the meaning. One. Thank you very much. So, the world is will and representation. We talked about the representation part. But still, but still, but still, but still, but still, but still, but still. Yes, I know, Mr. Schopenhauer, that things appear to me, and I need to look at things as I need to look at myself as having a graphical user interface, and that I cannot go beyond the interface. I never know what's beyond the interface. And later on, we'll talk about exactly what he says is the interface comes with. What do you come preloaded with? What is a priori? A priori just basically meaning what comes first, what is baked into the pie, okay? What is baked into the pie? What are the set of axioms, okay? What are the set of axioms? What's baked into the pie? Yes, I know that I cannot separate the object from the subject. Yes, I know that the only way I know of this pen is that it appears to me. I don't know the pen any other way. The way I know even my body is that it appears to me. It's always coming through this graphical user interface or this interface, this consciousness, which is me. Okay. I can never separate myself from it. Okay. But I still want to know what stuff really is. Right? We still have that urge. We're still like, well, yeah, but what really is the pen? And then he says, okay. Here it is. As I said, or as he said, the world as will and representation. So far, we've talked about the representation part. And then there is the will part. Okay? The will part. And shout out to Falcon Black in the house. Shout out to Bro Truth in the house. Shout out to Nicer in the house. Thank you very much for doing what you do. As we go deep here into the territory of 19th century German idealism. Now, we're still asking the question, we say, hey, what is the pen though? I still want to know what the pen, like some people may ask, like, what does it feel like to be an electron? What does it feel like to be the sun? What is really the nature of things? Is it conscious? Is it God? Is it what? How about pantheism? Blah, 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 blah. He says, wait, notice this thing though. We experience the world in two ways. One is through representation, but we have access, special access, to one representation, which is us. Our body is representation to our consciousness, but we also have special access to the internal workings of our body. In other words, we know what will feels like. Okay? So the will part is basically saying we have internal sense of the object. One specific, very complicated object, that object being our body. So let me reiterate. Metaphysics is a study of what is. Metaphysics is what undergirds physics. Meta means what's beyond or what underlies, basically, what is the support, the foundation, the below or the above of something. So metaphysics, what underlies reality. And we're like, okay, through German idealism, the point of view is you take consciousness to be primary. You take the user interface to be primary. You never try to get out of it and talk about things in themselves because all you know is things that appear to you. You never know of a pen besides the fact that it appears to your consciousness. There is no object without subject. And at the subject object dichotomy should not be decoupled. That if you try to decouple it, you're doing nonsense, because nobody ever experienced the sun. They only appear to experience the sun, or the sun appears to them. It appears to their senses, it appears to their user interface. There is always a user interface involved. But then we say, okay, I know of this particular one object that I can feel from the inside, which is myself, my consciousness. I can feel my consciousness from the inside. Okay? I can feel my body from the inside. This one object. So when I ask myself, what is the nature of the pen? Maybe I should ask and study myself, what is the nature? What does it feel like to be a body? And perhaps I can then transfer this knowledge about the will, okay, the will to eat, the will to live, the will to take your next breath, that urge, the drive, the desires, the push. How about if that can be analogized to the gravitational force, electromagnetic force, the strong force and the weak force in the nucleus? In other words, the fundamental forces of physics, let's just take that, and then how it builds up to chemistry and then builds up to biology and so on and so forth. How about if these things can also be called will? So the representation part, I don't think is very complex. Nothing there, but they need to be brought together as we go along. But the will part says something here, which is you know what will is, albeit the will of a very complex object, okay? But if you're trying to ask yourself, what is the nature of God? What is the nature of the force of gravity? What does this particular pen feel when it is forced to drop on my hand? What does it feel? What does it experience? What is the urge that pushes it? We say it's gravity and we calculate it and we chart it out, but what is gravity? Right? What is it? I want to know. I'm not satisfied by just saying that I can chart it. I can talk about how fast it drops. I can talk about how it is affected by mass. I can talk about the gravitational constant, right? I got gravitational constant. I have this mass. I have this other mass. I have the distance between them. And, it reduces as a function of the square of the distance between them. All that is fine, but what does the pen feel when it is forced to come down to my hand? I want to know. I want to know. I want to know. Chaos Rain, what's good, Ike? What's good to you? The answer is to think that the fundamental forces gravitational force, electromagnetic force, the strong and weak force, then build up to chemistry and so on and so forth, are will. Okay? That they are will. The will of what? Okay? The will of God. Now, he goes on definitely to expound upon the idea, okay, in terms of not just saying, oh, it's will, but he understands that or should I say, there are levels to will. So gravity, for example, is one of the base ones and one of the easiest ones for us to kind of understand. We feel the will of gravity and we understand the will of this particular thing to want to come down to this thing. So let's use that as an analogy. He's saying that the gravitational force, for example, is a very dumb, simple, and blind will. Okay? But that it's not so far removed in terms of being analogous to the will that we feel, which is will on over up here in biology. First of all, you have your fundamental forces, they form fundamental particles, atoms, and so on and so forth. And then you have chemistry, very complex organic chemistry. And then you have biology, which is a combination of organic chemistry when it comes to proteins and fats and carbohydrates and nucleic acids, which form the DNA, and all this complex dance of many wills is what we experience as will in ourselves. So when we ask, what is the world? We say the world, in the one hand, is representation, okay? That I can know. It appears to me the same way that my graphical user interface appears on the screen. But I cannot know, or I know that the recycling bin on my screen is not really a recycling bin. So all I know is that this pen appears to me, but I don't really know what the pen is. Okay, I don't know what the pen is. All I know is that it's kind of like a user interface. It says, if I do this, this will happen. Okay, just the same way, if I drag a file into the recycling bin, it will get deleted. But is it really a recycling bin? No. So can I say I know what this pen is? No, I don't know what the pen is. It appears in the graphical user interface this way, though. And this appearance tells me about what it can do, just the same way the appearance of the recycling bin tells me what it can do. Okay? Fine, representation. And then we know something else, which is the will. So we can talk about the world perceived from the internal, okay? Not just perceived from the internal, but how it moves, okay? So the idea is this: you have a certain kind of a character, okay? You have a certain build, you have a certain kind of a makeup. In other words, or should I say, such that if you set up an experiment in a certain way, the dominoes are going to fall down in that particular way, right? That if you, or let's say, I don't know, whatever your addiction is, okay? Maybe you're addicted to strippers in Miami or something, okay? And it says, look, your will is such that, and it's mechanical this way, that if we set up the experiment or we put you in this particular situation in Miami with all the right hormones shooting in the right way, again, physical things happening, okay, that you're going to fall for those strippers in Miami every time. The same way this pen is going to fall down to my hand if I let it go. And that will, that drive, that desire that pushes you towards the strippers in Miami is analogous to the will of gravity, the will that urges this particular object to fall down on my hand. That this one is the bass note, a very rudimentary and basic, okay, very far from the kind of will you experience, but the book goes deep in elaborating, okay, goes deep in elaborating the idea that they all build upon each other. That the bass notes of the gravity then builds upon the harmony of the chemistry, that then builds upon the biology and the this and the that and the other. So it does feel like something, if you will, to be urged by gravity, even though it's not at all the same thing, but that we should think about it analogously to will, the fundamental forces, the fundamental nature. We talked about the representation, but now what is the fundamental nature of things? This book says, well, it is about will. Look, the book is not a small book, okay? So, I mean, look at that. And this is not, it's not small print either, okay? It's a heavy book, it's a big book. So it goes deep, through, thorough. And this is a German guy, so you know he wasn't talking nonsense. They tend not to talk a lot of nonsense. He's a German idealist, lived again in the 1800s. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the major influences of Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the major influences or influencers. Well, no, I prefer to say it this way. Influences that Friedrich Nietzsche had. Okay? So let's continue. Okay? Let's continue. And if anyone, by the way, wishes to ask any questions in particular, just kind of as I go along, want to be like, hey, Ike, you need to clarify something or the other, go ahead and join the stream. The stream is open, okay? Join the stream. And don't be scared. So, fundamental forces are like will, okay? The fundamental forces are like will. So now beyond the point of just pure metaphysical speculation, okay? What can we say, right? What can we say? How can this lead downstream? Because I said again, the way philosophy tends to work or the way it's organized is you have metaphysics on the top. You got to talk about what are your metaphysics. And by the way, everybody has a metaphysical engine. Everybody has an underlying metaphysical engine. Everybody has that. Everyone has a private metaphysics, something that they believe in order to keep things coherent for them. Some people believe in God and some people don't believe in God, but they have some kind of private metaphysics. The idea of philosophy is some people make it conscious and some people don't make it conscious. I am one of those that likes to make it conscious. That's why I'm a student of philosophy. I do also highly recommend it because the more conscious you are, the better off things are, in my opinion. The more conscious you are, the more in control you are. The more in control you are, the more you can measure, manage, and implement improvements in all areas of your life. Again, everybody has a philosophy. Everybody has a philosophy. Some people are just not conscious of it, but it'll lead them to act in certain ways. Okay? So, metaphysics, and then flowing downward from that is how do you know things? Okay? It's called epistemology. Okay? We can skip that one because epistemology and metaphysics are very closely tied together. What something is and how you know it, very closely tied together. Okay? But then you go down to ethics, all right, and aesthetics, okay, and politics. In other words, your metaphysics affects what you consider to be the good life, the nature of the true, the good, and the beautiful, all the way down to politics. Now, okay, the average human being does not tend to think of things this way. The average human being likes to think of politics as a team sport, and they just like to go ahead and do stupid things and follow stupid people and have assigned opinions that are assigned to them by their preferred media outlet. Okay? Average people don't listen to my streams. So we're not talking to them. We're not even talking about them. So the question and the reason why I brought this up is because what, okay, what can we get from this general metaphysical idea that views the world as will and representation? Again, we talk about the representation part, which means that the object always appears to a subject. In other words, consciousness is primary. The user interface is primary, okay? And we're going to expound upon these things about what comes, what comes in this toolkit, okay? And it basically says that space, time, causality, okay, are all part of the toolkit that come with you. That space, time, and causality are not out there. Causality you can just think of as matter or action, or because causality is all within the realm of matter. Space and time, you know, you just say they're empty, they're basically the arena. Okay, that's the arena. That's the where. Where is space and time, right? That's the arena. Okay, and then the what, and then the how, that's the causality. Okay, you can wrap the matter and the causality into one thing. That all that comes as part of the graphical user interface, and you cannot say that they are out there. Just like you cannot say that there's really a recycling bin on your desktop, that you just see a recycling bin. So you just experience the world through space, time, causality, and there's certain other things like they're called metalogical. In other words, they underlie logic, they cannot be proven, such as the principle of non-contradiction, that something cannot at the same time and in the same respect be A and also B. Okay, so something can not be and also be the same. That law of non-contradiction comes with the package. It's not something that can be proven. Let me say that again so you really understand. There are things that are inbuilt into the machine. Spatial intuition, the understanding of geometry, and I'll go ahead and I'll do an example of that. The understanding of geometry is not something that is in books. It is something that is part of your graphical user interface. What the books do is they take an axiom, which is an intuition, something that you and I already know, and then they make connections with that axiom using logic, okay, which you and I already have an intuition for. We have intuition for logic, and we can see why A leads to B leads to C. And then they create a nice closed loop, and they call that a proof. A proof, for example, of why a triangle has 180 degrees. I'm not going to go too deep in that, but I'll give an example to kind of demonstrate to you that your spatial intuition is where these truths come from, and that a whole book filled with Euclidean geometry and the proofs of these different things really are taken from your intuition, and then they do a logical dance around, and it looks very complicated and very hard and very messy, but really your interface already knew that. Your space-time interface already knew that. Your interface that already comes inbuilt with the laws of causality already knew that. And your metalogical, which is the part I wanted to reiterate, which basically says the fact that you know that things cannot contradict each other, it's not something that you can prove to anybody. We just know that. Have you ever considered that? It is part of the program. The program has metaphysics and metalogic built in. One of the main metalogical concepts is the law of non-contradiction, formalized by Aristotle. But Aristotle just formalized it by stating it. Aristotle says A is A. In other words, A cannot be A and also B in the same space, time, and the same respect. You cannot say that something is and is not. But why can't we say that? We just know we can't say that. There is no outside proof. In other words, your graphical interface, your user interface, and I keep saying graphical just so that we understand the analogy, but it's beyond graphics, okay? The graphical part is the space-time part, okay? And then we talk about the causality part, but there's a metalogical part. In other words, your program builds in an idea that things cannot contradict themselves, and you did not learn that anywhere. You cannot even prove that. But we just know. Let me see. Let me see here. I strongly agree, Big Ike, and everybody do have a philosophy. Yes, 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 yes. Everybody has a philosophy. We have a personal metaphysics that then bleeds into our ethics, our epistemology, our politics, and so on and so forth. But some people are very messy with it because it's not made conscious to them. So they contradict themselves all the time, and they're not very coherent, and they flow with emotion. Okay? And over here, especially as a grown damn man, you should at least know why you believe what you say you believe. You should at least be able to go ahead and pick up a book or maybe pick up an audio book on a particular line of reasoning that you may think you're in line with. Go back to the sources, okay? The book we're talking about today again is The World is Real and Representation, a book that is about metaphysical philosophy, metaphysics being that which underlies everything. What underlies physics? Metaphysics. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about this side, which is what flows from an idea that the world is will. So think about this. There could be something there could be a bunch of forces in the world, which there are indeed are forces in the world. Physical forces, let's say, as defined by the physicists, we've broken it down into gravitational force, the electromagnetic force, and then the strong force and the weak force. The strong force and the weak force are in the nucleus. They are effective in tiny, tiny spaces. Okay? You don't feel the strong force and the weak force unless you go down into the nucleus of the atom. But we're all aware of the gravitational force, and we all know about the electromagnetic force because we've all had magnets and we all know about electronics. The thing is, these forces are all constantly competing with each other blindly. Okay? In other words, the will for this pen to be pulled down to my hand is competing. Okay? This pen is getting pulled down to the center of the earth. It's never going to stop willing to be pulled down to the center of the earth. It will never stop that no matter what happens. And the electromagnetic force is what keeps it from going through my hand. Okay, that's what keeps things from passing through each other. It's electromagnetic forces. Okay, that's what gives things rigidity, if you will. It's what gives them substance and rigidity. The pen does not pass through my hand because of electromagnetic forces between the two constituent objects or the constituent parts of the object. So the will for gravity is pushing down. The will for the electromagnetic force is pushing up. The world, in other words, viewed through this metaphysical lens, is a blind, chaotic force of will against will. Just blind will against will, never ending, chaotic, crazy, pointless. Why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because metaphysics leads to epistemology, which is how do you know things, and then it leads to that gives you a view of the world. And then with a view of the world, you then get to decide what is the true, the good, and the beautiful. What is the good life? Therefore, what's the good society? And then politics comes out of the other end. Okay, but this is the flow of philosophy, starting with metaphysics down to politics. It encompasses everything in your life. Everything in your life, from what is, how do I know what is beautiful, what is good, what is true, what is the good life, how should I live, and therefore what's the right societal arrangement. Everything flows from your metaphysics. So I just stated a worldview from this idea of the world as will and representation. It is a rather bleak one. The worldview says, look at the forces, the fundamental forces as will, because we are able to experience some or the results of a complex dance of these forces, building from basic forces of gravity, electromagnetism, and then go into the chemistry, and then complex organic compounds, and then biology, and then blah, blah, blah. And then internally, we feel it as a will to survive, a will to be, a will to procreate, that we can analogize all the other lesser wills, if you will, such as base, blind, gravitational will, as the same or as representations of the same fundamental willing of the world. That the world is just willing against itself all the time. That gravity is willing for the pen to go down, and magnetic force or rigidity is willing for it to stay on my hand, and that they will continue to fight forever. This gives you a view of the world. Let me get a 1 in the chat if you understand that this is a view of the world from which things will flow, from which the idea of, well, how should I live? What should I consider the world? What is the world? What is my purpose in the world? Looking at this world, at the world this way, in terms of the world as will and representation, is something that will cause aesthetics,
aesthetics, politics, ethics, and so on and so forth to flow. Let me go ahead and read some of the chats. Okay. Oliver Eugene says, can you do a series on videos on thematic on the several hermetic principles? Okay. Is the laws of attraction part of metaphysics? Okay. How do you differentiate legit sources from those who have no business contemplating the universe? As a grown man, you should at least have a 3-row bookshelf. Yes, 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 yes. In these spaces, okay? In these spaces, the RP spaces, the spaces that are channeling or dedicated to, let's say, men in YouTube, people always want to talk about what they deserve. But they don't want to take the responsibility. They don't want to take the responsibility and do the work. Like you said, sir, they don't have no bookshelves. And they don't have a coherent plan for even the mundane things, not to even talk about maybe rubbing a few cells together to climb a few ladders of intellectual pursuits, creative pursuits. And they don't have to reinvent the wheel either. It's not like you have to reinvent the wheel. Okay? For the person that asked about the law of attraction, the law of attraction, okay, is, in my opinion, a very, very surface manifestation of deeper things that can be explained in a rather mechanistic way when it comes to subjective consciousness. And I talked about it yesterday. The law of attraction is about attention. Yesterday, I talked about the fact that if you want to make improvements, you are the CEO. In other words, your consciousness, which is a very thin layer that lies underneath a massive mass of unconsciousness. Unconsciousness being the beating of your heart, the regulation of the thoughts in your head, the image, the reel, okay, the camera reel that's rolling in your head right now. Just a whole bunch of images just going through your head right now. Okay, if you close your eyes and focus, you'll see them. Okay, and voices just going on in your head right now. All the 10,000 voices of the 10,000 demons in your head. Okay, the regulation of your blood pH and the homeostasis, the regulation of your temperature, all that stuff is unconscious. Okay, and you're very, 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 very incompetent to handle any of that stuff. All you have is this thin layer of consciousness which has the ability to pay attention. And when you say pay attention, attention is the payment that you give to your unconscious self in order for it to do work. So you want to improve something, you pay attention to it. So the law of attraction is mainly about, let's put it in terms of, let's say, affirmations, okay? You go ahead and you write things down, you say certain things, you're simply paying attention to those things, and then you outsource the implementation of the improvement to the unconscious. That's what the law of attraction really is about. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy, to completely answer the question, because someone asked about the law of attraction, and also they asked if metaphysics is part of that. Metaphysics is a very specific thing. Metaphysics means meta, which is beyond or below physics, right? In other words, what is the nature of things? Talking about the law of attraction has gone way, many steps below the Mount Olympus of metaphysics. Okay, that's way down in ethics land of how do you live, and then even more practical than ethics, or what are the practical actions to take in order to do certain things. But I'm saying that it is not, because of my private metaphysics, I don't believe that it is something that is mysterious. It is as simple as paying attention to something and then outsourcing it to your unconscious, and your unconscious will implement, measure, manage, and implement improvement programs based on what you pay attention to. And the law of attraction simply says pay attention to those things, and then those things will happen. The problem is they don't tell you how it'll happen. They say it's just woo-woo magic and the law. And it's like, no, as much as possible, woo-woo magic and the law is not real knowledge. You cannot tell a kid woo-woo magic and a law. You need to be able to break things down that a 5-year-old will be able to intuitively grasp. We come pre-programmed with space-time causality, okay, and metalogic. All right. If you cannot break these things down to the intuition, to the intuitive level, and if you people are just saying it's woo-woo magic and some law, they're not doing you any good. It's a big disservice. They need to be able to break it down to my intuition. My intuition is not fake. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about the fact that I'm built and you are built with an engine, a graphical user interface, as I keep on analogizing to, that understands how things work. So anyone who comes with woo-woo magic and the law without making it break down to your intuition and say, well, this is the mechanism by which that works, does you a disservice. So that will be the answer to that. And then Nicer asked a very good question. How do you differentiate between legit sources and between those that do not? Look, a classic car is classic for a reason. What I'm doing here may be said to be an appeal to tradition, but it's not really an appeal to tradition. The appeal to tradition exactly, Carl. Kids don't believe you when you talk that woo-woo magic stuff. If you cannot tell a kid something that appeals to his intuition, you don't really know it. And whoever told you it doesn't know what they're talking about either. It doesn't mean that the thing doesn't work. Affirmations work, but why do they work is the question. And if somebody tells you, oh, it's just the and the universe, you put it out there into the universe, and it's like, no, you tell me like I'm a human being, goddammit. Don't insult my intelligence. If you can't tell me, then just tell me you don't know. And it's fine not to know. There are many things we don't know, but there are things that are knowable, and there are principles that are practical and should be followed and should be understood. That's all I'm saying. So to Nicer's question, I said classic cars are classic for a reason. In other words, use the wisdom of the masses over time. Okay? There are certain books, such as this guy, right? Certain philosophers like Authur Schopenhauer, who still sells books today, since the 1800s. There's certain books, let's say, like the Bible. I'm not necessarily that you're going to believe these things, but you're asking where to look. Okay? Then you look at the judgments of people over the millennia. People are still talking about Friedrich Nietzsche today, it's because he had something to say. If people are still listening to Bach today, it's because he discovered something principally fundamental about music and he did certain things that are good. Okay? So the classics. If people are still talking about Plato till this day, it's because he encapsulated certain things. Now, where he may have gotten it from, whether it be from because everybody always gets things from other places. There's nothing new under the sun, right? So getting things from Egypt, for the person that talked about, so getting things from Egypt, let's say, and then also getting things from Persia and all those other Mesopotamian, or should I say, the ancient Mesopotamian world and the Sumerians and the Assyrians and the Persians and so on and so forth. But Plato, but in other words, somebody had to write it down in a nice way that could be passed on. And Plato was one of those people. And if people are still talking about Plato, who lived was like 1500 years before Jesus lived, okay? If we're still talking about that guy, then you know he has something to say. If we're still talking about the Bible, then you know. In other words, Nicer, and let me know if that makes sense. Use the judgments of tradition. And not everything was written down. There's also oral history, right? So regardless of which particular culture you're working within, you want to use those things that have stood the test of time. Because there's a saying that goes like this. Life is short, but art is long. Life is short, but art is long. Life is short, but art is long. What does that mean? That basically means, look, you only have one life to live. Use the wisdom of the ancients. Use the people whom have codified certain things that have been tested through time. So, these classics have been made, an impact in the world, just like how Apple Computer is making an impact today. Indeed, indeed, indeed. EG says, please don't use straw to drink. Well, the straw is part of the cup. It's not a straw in the way you think of straw. Unless you're saying something about the action of sucking things in, and maybe that's bad. Clarify. Do you mean the straw itself? In which case, the straw is part of this cup? Or are you saying the action of drinking that way has some detrimental effects? Because I would like to learn. I would like to learn. So, we were talking about the implications of looking at the world in this particular way. The world as blind will fighting against will. Okay? Will against will. Will against will. Gravitational will, pushing this pen down to the middle of the earth. Electromagnetic will, stopping it from going through. The whole world is just chaos of will fighting against will. What kind of a life should you then live? How should you look at the world? This gives you an aesthetics and an ethics, which is called asceticism. Or shall we just say, it talks about, it centers on suffering. In other words, it is like Buddha said. Okay? And this guy was also, Authur Schopenhauer, that is, was a student of the Vedic tradition, things that come out of India and Buddha, so on and so forth. Okay? He was a student of those things, but also traditional German philosopher from the school of Immanuel Kant, blah, blah, blah. And he was one of the first to marry these two worlds together. And he did it this way, rather than Buddha coming from within, because Buddha was not one of the first and most profound psychologists that ever walked the face of the earth. And he said, the world is suffering, okay? And the cause of your suffering is desires. What this guy says is the world is will and representation. We already went through the representation part, and we'll talk about it a little bit more over here. But the will part, okay, we also talked about, which is that we have access to this particular object, and that every other force out there in the world, electromagnetic, gravitational, chemical forces, so on and so forth, are analogous to will, to desire, to drive. And that this blind fighting of will against will, as I exemplified with the pen on my hand, gravitational will, wanting it to go to the center of the earth, electromagnetic will, stopping it, and they will continue to fight forever, leads him to the same conclusion that Buddha had, which was these desires and these wills will never be resolved, ladies and gentlemen. That the world is Maya, according to the Buddhists. That the world is like a mirage, and that is the representation part. That the world is always an object to a subject. that it always appears to a consciousness that its external reality is something that cannot be verified or is in doubt, or as a matter of fact, it is the nature of the world to be tied to consciousness, is another way to put it. And then on this will side of things, that there will never be a resolution to the fighting of these different wills, just like there will never be a resolution to the conflict between gravity and electromagnetism going on in my hand right now. And it just never stops. And it's just blind will against will, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So what do you do about it? What do you do about it? What do you do about it? It suggests that you understand the working of the will so that you can get beyond it. Is that an easy thing to do? But first of all, let me get one in the chat if you understand what it means, what I just described. Okay, we talked about the world as will and idea. We talked about many kinds of things about metaphysics and representation, and the fact that we should analogize the forces with the will, which we can experience because there's one object that we have an internal experience of, but that when you look at the world this way, you're going to end up seeing that the world is just a bunch of blind will against blind will, whether it be on the human level with desires fighting against each other and us killing each other, or whether it be as simple as gravity and electromagnetism fighting right here. Pointless, blind fighting all the time. Does that make sense? And to the conclusions that one begins to draw, either through Authur Schopenhauer or through Buddha, does that make sense to you? Let me get a one in the chat. If this particular journey, quick though it may be, through the landscape of the work of Authur Schopenhauer in this book resonates with you guys, if it makes sense, if I've done at least some justice in making it make sense. Okay? And let me go ahead now. Bro Truth, can you say something just so I can test my audio and see if things are...
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Yes, sir, I can hear you. Let me, just give me 1 second here. Yeah, so I see ones in the chat. All right. So basically, quick thing here before we continue, and I'm going to talk to Bro Truth as well. And perhaps we'll not be able to expose the entirety of this thing because it's already an hour and a half. And this is just skimming the surface of this book and of things of this nature. But as I said, I'm doing this stream because people ask, like, okay, want to talk to us about books and stuff like that? I'm like, okay, well, these are the kind of books that I read, and Authur Schopenhauer is one of the great philosophers that is out there. But his metaphysics, which generally leads to ethics, aesthetics, epistemology, and politics, everything else is downstream from there. The metaphysics which you just described will lead you to more of a Buddhist ethics of life, which is, hey, everything is blind will against will against will against will. Okay? And they never resolve themselves. Don't get in the dance. Step out of the dance. How can you step out of the dance? You can use your consciousness to observe the play of wills. Now, this is something I've talked in many other streams in terms of master of subjective consciousness, being able to separate yourself, create that guy, okay, that watches the elephant at play. And then comes happiness, then comes the good life. And then what kind of a politics should you have? Well, follows from the kind of things that you consider to be good. Politics always has to talk about ethics, because if you're going to talk about the good society, you need to talk about the good life. You need to talk about what good is. And if for you to know what good is, you need to know what is. In other words, the nature of reality itself. And that's why philosophy is very important. But anyways, Bro Truth, welcome, welcome, welcome. What you got for us today?
My brain hurts, bro. I'm trying to fight this nosebleed. Like, it's a lot of information, man. I'm definitely tracking on some regards, and I'm kind of trying to pick back up the pace on others. Um, I guess I wanted to, because I find the topic of metaphysics fascinating as well. In particular, I guess the principle of the holographic universe and string theory. So, in regards to that, being that I know with the holographic universe, basically, from my memory, is a theory that states that everything in existence essentially resides on a two-dimensional plane. And string theory being a theory that basically combines gravity and particle science, a particle theory into one. And you then have forces, gravitons, that basically vibrate at different frequencies and basically give the string its mass, right? At least that's the way I understand it. But anyway, so I know I'm just trying to understand, like, how would this particular the metaphysics portion of his theory or of his philosophy carry over into the holographic universe, and how string theory interacts between the different planes of the holographic universe. I know that's another portion. And like I said, I study this somewhat, but I'm definitely no physicist or anything like that. But as far as like living in a holographic realm, you know what I mean? It's I fell down that. I fell down that.
That trippy.
I fell down that rabbit hole a while ago, man, and just looking and it's I don't see how any person can like start researching that we live in a holographic world and then not find themselves knee deep in a book or two, but yeah, I just wanted I honestly just wanted to figure out how would this particular philosophy carry over into that world, into that theory rather, because you mentioned that you were, I guess, what the particle, the will being the opposing forces of the particles, but if you take away particle theory and replace it with string theory, where there's no particles involved, it's only string and the vibrations of the string theory. I'm just trying to figure out how that jive with the.
So you open a few boxes here, and I would like to touch on them and then see how they connect with each other, if you will, right?
Yeah.
The first thing I would like to mention is your broad statement of how things, how this particular work would connect with ideas that in modern physics, if you will. Okay. I'll have to restate that this is a book written in the 19th century, which means in the 1800s, right? 1844, as a matter of fact, is when it was published. So its understanding of physics was 1844 understanding of physics. It does not mean, though, that I'm saying that it does not have things to, or the philosophy that is espoused here in terms of metaphysics does not have something to say about what you just mentioned. But I want to go ahead and first of all kind of clarify a couple of things that you said. Okay. Now, the holographic theory has to do with information being the information in a volume, right, being stored in a two-dimensional surface outside of that volume. And if you don't mind unmuting yourself so that because I want the feedback so we can kind of see if we're on the same page. So
Yeah, sure.
okay. So a
I didn't
volume,
want to interrupt or anything. Go ahead.
a volume, and the information contained in that volume, the and information is a complicated thing when it comes to physics, okay? But that it can be represented or is represented in a two-dimensional surface that is outside that volume and not inside. So it's not voxels, it's pixels on the outside of the volume, if you will. That is your understanding of the holographic principle, right?
Yeah. So I guess I know that the holographic universe theory basically arose from the study of black holes and
Yeah.
how
Mhm.
the I guess at the event horizon,
Mhm.
the the entire mass of an object that may fall into a black hole can be represented on the
Yeah.
surface of the event horizon.
Yes.
However, from the perspective of the object that fell into the black hole, there still is a 3D representation
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You're correct. And this is something in is it Suskind, right? You know who I'm talking about, right?
Oh
the
no, I
guy.
do not. I
Okay.
just like real talk. I'm not like I'm not
Mhm.
a huge like I don't devour like physics books on the weekend, but I do study it as a hobby. It's like one of those interests I have.
I'll recommend this book to you. It's called The Black Hole Wars. It's written by Suskind. I forget his first name escapes me right now, but he is a physicist, one of the pioneers of string theory. He's a physicist at that school over there, Stanford University over here in the Bay Area, and he is one of the pioneers or proponents of this particular view, okay, in terms of the studying of the black holes and coming up with the holographic principle. I think it actually is his, okay. So go ahead and study that book. But I'm going to zoom out from that, and I'm going to say two things.
Okay.
Number one, when it comes to your question about how would it apply, it doesn't change any. In other words, what he is saying here is that whatever your representation of the world is, okay, is still just a representation within your space, time, causality, and metalogical user interface. That you cannot
Oh,
separate
okay.
consciousness from it.
So it's basically the stereo independent, pretty much.
Yes. In other words, you cannot, no matter what science does, as long as unless science is able to separate the object from the subject, other than just doing it arbitrarily, because what it does is it does it arbitrarily. It says, I'm going to act as though this is an objective truth because it can be independently verified through experiments. Set up the experiment this way, and this thing will always happen. But as a matter of fact, it is still observed by observers. In other words, you cannot separate consciousness from the universe. Okay, we're yet to do that at this point. So the idea here of German idealism, and again, that's why there's schools of thought in philosophy, and I'm representing this school of thought, right?
Mm.
In terms of a, shall we say, an expose on the book, right? It doesn't mean that I could not then look at other people whom, on the other hand, are realists. In other words, realists say there is an independent reality, that we should look at the independent reality of things rather than talk about how that it appears to us in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But idealists will say, no, you've never seen an object, or you always see an object, you always touch an object. You don't know of any pen besides the fact that it always comes along with you, right? It always comes along with a consciousness. And if all consciousness were to disappear, we don't know what the pen really is, right? We don't know what the pen is other than the fact that it appears to consciousness in a certain way. And then consciousness comes preloaded with a user interface. And space, time, and causality, and certain methodological concepts are part of the user interface. In other words, you cannot talk about the fact that there's space out there or that there's time out there, because it's always part of your particular way in which you experience the universe. Now, there will always, and that's why it's called metaphysics. In other words, it's beyond physics, right? So metaphysics is always there to ask the question, well, what underlies that? And there are many different kinds of metaphysics. For example, you could just say God made it, right? And God is controlling it. And God is the God is running the screen behind the hologram, okay, for the holographic, principle, right? Or whatever, right? That is a metaphysics in and of itself. This particular one just says that you should not, and I think it's sound and it's valid, which is the statement that the object always comes with a subject, right? And that they, as a matter of fact, and people like Hegel, another philosopher, say they go about and say that they give rise to each other almost. That the fact that you know that you're you has something to do with the fact that you know that you're not your cell phone or whatever else it is, that you're always so, defining yourself by the fact. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just a point of clarity. So we say object is always coupled with a subject, meaning that in the universe, you basically, just from a rudimentary example, you have a table. The table is known to have stuff on top of it. Or if you have a envelope is it's basically something that everyone knows the envelope is for. Whether you have large envelopes, you have small envelopes, you're going to put something inside the envelope. Or if you have a box, a box, people, I guess the subject would be.
You're thinking about it grammatically. If I think I understand what you're saying, but really this is simpler. This is simply saying that you are a subject. In other words, you are a subject. Consciousness is subject, and that every object, everything, literal object, right, is always something that appears to a subject. So if you want to talk about the object by itself, you're going into a weird land, that you can never talk about something without the fact that when there ever is something to be talked about, there always seems to be this other thing, which is called consciousness. Does that make sense?
Okay, got you. So, okay, all right, yeah. You're right. I was thinking of it from a grammatical sense, in that I was thinking, like you were saying, objects coupled with a broader sense of what that particular object is. All tables are tables. All pens are meant for writing. That's what I thought. But yeah, I get what you're saying now. So you basically it's a wider or a pullback, right?
Yes.
So I see myself as the subject, and that the object is my objective reality.
Yes, that all objective reality cannot be separated from this thing called a subject.
Got you. Okay.
That our quest to find objective reality is our quest sometimes to separate it from the fact that there's always consciousness present. We want to run away from this thing called consciousness, partly because we cannot understand it, partly because we cannot measure it. Okay. That's the reason why, right? And let me take for example, this another kind of a thought here, which is there are people whom, let's just call them materialists, okay? And a materialist will be a realist, right? Definitely, by definition, not that idealists cannot be materialists as well, but Materialists generally tend to be realists, and they would explain consciousness by saying, you know what? Consciousness is just an arrangement of matter in a particular way. You get what I'm saying? They would say consciousness is matter doing a particular dance. Now, they can't prove that. Okay, they don't have the proof, but that's their working theory. They're like, you know what? At some point, we'll get to the point where we know that consciousness is just matter doing a particular dance.
So it's basically, it's like, I know materialism is one of the foundational principles of Marxism. So there's nothing outside of matter but matter itself. I got you.
So, but the thing is, and you know, Marx flipped Hegel on his head. Hegel was a dialectical guy, but he did it in the realm of spirit, which is the realm of consciousness. And then Marx flipped it to material dialectic. But the thing is, you have these two things. You have matter, you observe matter, right? And then this other thing in the world, which everybody knows, that you can't escape from it, it's called consciousness, right? Now, you say, I'm going to explain this thing, consciousness, in terms of this thing, matter. Okay? But that's just a choice, some would say, and I tend to agree. How about if I say I'm going to explain matter in terms of consciousness? I had two things. I arrived here and I saw two things. I saw matter and I saw consciousness. And then I ask you, what's consciousness? You say, you know what? I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it has something to do with this other thing. Your question is, well, why you have so much faith in this other thing? It's like saying, you know what? Matter is pixie dust, because it's like saying consciousness is when pixie dust dances in a certain way. Because matter, what I'm telling you is matter is just as mysterious as consciousness. But the reason why people think that I want to explain everything with matter is because they can touch it, hold it, measure it, push it around. Therefore, they start to think that it is something that they know. You know what I mean? The fact is, both of them are equally as trippy, but one is not amenable to being pushed around, measured, and so on and so forth. The one that we can push around, measure, and so on and so forth, people then say, hey, you know what? I don't know what this consciousness thing is, but I bet this other thing that I like to play around with, I bet at some point I'll be able to explain consciousness with this other thing, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, yeah, man, this is heavy stuff, bro. So basically, what you said, the last portion of it, there's an attempt to explain the conscious realm through materialism. Is that what was the last point?
Yes, there's an attempt to explain, saying, hey, you know what? There's this thing I have a handle on called matter. And whether it be from a point of view of what is consciousness or what moves consciousness, or even from Marx's perspective, what moves people and what moves the whole economies, I'm going to just talk about it that it's matter. So from a basic point of view, I'm going to say consciousness is matter doing a certain dance. Which kind of dance, the form of the dance, I don't know. They haven't proven any of that yet. Okay, but the matter thing, I can look at it in the telescope, I can measure it, I can push it around, I can talk, I can weigh it, so I'm more comfortable with it. Okay, but those two things, you came into this universe and you saw, they're both equally trippy. Matter could be called pixie dust and magic dust for all you know, but because you can move it around, you feel more comfortable with it, so you want to explain everything in terms of it, including consciousness. But the question is, well, why don't I take consciousness to be primary? And then I explain matter in terms of consciousness. Why don't I say, hey, you know what? Consciousness, spirit is primary. And there's this big supreme spirit called God, and matter is his dream or something. You get what I'm saying? It's like both of those starting points are equally valid. Okay? You can't just say, I'm going to choose matter and then try to explain consciousness with it. Or it's like, well, why don't you choose consciousness as the primary one? Who said? And the reason why people do it, again, I have to come back to the reason why people do it, is because matter can be pushed around. You can touch it, you can measure it. We're more comfortable with it. Therefore, we take it as primary. The idealist, Arthur Schopenhauer being one of them, says, hey, I'm going to take consciousness as primary, that there is no such thing as an object without a subject to observe it. In our experience, as a matter of fact, it is not some kind of a theoretical thing, okay? It is not a theoretical thing that whenever there is objective reality, there is always consciousness tied with it. You cannot separate the two. You have never just experienced the sun without it going through your user interface, which is your consciousness, right? And that even that you don't even know what you are other than the fact that you are not what you observe. In other words, these two things they're like two sides of the same coin. Who is Bro Truth? Well, Bro Truth in his experience of himself experiences stuff and then says, oh, that is the stuff over there. And I define myself as opposed to the other stuff. In other words, I know that I'm not the laptop. That's how I know who I am. I know that I'm not, you get what I'm saying? Like these two things interdefine each other. The subject, okay, which is the consciousness, defines itself as not being the object, okay, and it defines the object as not being it. So it's like this dichotomy which creates your experience. If you were the object, now you can have certain psychedelic experiences or certain meditation, you can get deep into certain trances where the border between subject and object starts to blend away, okay? And that's where at the end of the day, the ethics and the aesthetics of this kind of a point of view comes in, which is you want to put yourself in a state of mind where you begin to see the interplay of subject and object, this play of consciousness and the objective world, and stop fighting the fight of wills against each other, and separate yourself from it, and that therefore becomes the happy life and so on and so forth. But one thing to your initial point about physics, okay? So I first of all said that it doesn't really matter what the particular physics is. This is just saying that whatever it is, that it is will. Because we just talked about the representation part, the idea part, but there's a will part that what's causing things to happen is a will. That gravitational force is a will. It's not the same kind of will. It's a simpler, dumber, baser kind of will than the kind of will that you experience, but that your will is a result of the interplay of all the other wills, which are electromagnetic, gravitational, and strong and weak force, which then build up chemistry, which then build up biology, and then which then build up you. But if you feel a will, you experience the world internally as will. Who is to say that gravity is not similar in the sense that there is a will that this pen feels, right? When it's put in this particular area, it has a will, it has a drive to come down here. And then there's a drive pushing it back up through the electromagnetic forces, right? Now, just to put it in the way from the other side, in terms of our will, I talked about you may have a weakness for strippers in Miami. And if you set up the experiment where you're in Miami in the right conditions, at the right whatever, right? And just like this pen feels that will to push to the pen, this is to my palm, to the center of the earth, if you will. And this is you in Miami in the right conditions, and boom, you're gonna fall. Just
right into the well.
Right into the well. Just the same
right into the well, man.
Right into the well.
I fell right off in it, man. Choked right up in the stripper well.
Exactly, right into the stripper well. It's the same kind of an idea that, hey, it's not as base or simple as the will that gravity represents, but one hand we see the world as an idea, representation, and the other hand there's will. And let me just finish up the point here that metaphysics, which is to your point, is that metaphysics lies outside the realm of physics. That's why it's called metaphysics. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to come down just with a summation. So we have one piece representation, which is basically the interplay between yourself, the subject, and the object, the objective reality. So basically, from his perspective, he sees the world as being influenced, or he sees the materialistic world being the main primary driver of consciousness. Is that his premise? Or
No,
is it the other way around, where your consciousness is
the other way around, which is saying
okay?
that you don't know anything other than the user interface.
Got you. Okay. So there is no objective reality without a subject.
Have you ever experienced anything without yourself being there?
Exactly. Yeah. No, I don't think I've ever. Besides that one time I did ayahuasca, that's that's about the only time. Okay, so I don't want to get lost on this train of thought I had. I'm just trying to put everything together. So we have one piece, was that representation piece. And then the will is analogous to the forces of nature, like electromagnetic force, gravity and whatnot. From a human standpoint, or from a conscious standpoint, that will is
your drive,
akin to the drive and the desire. Okay. And so does that actually play into the law of thermodynamics, where energy can't be destroyed, it can't be it can only be transferred, right? So with this will, and let's say you have the ability to think your reality into existence, right?
Who said that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the thing is like, where did you get the idea to start a YouTube channel and to get that board? You know what I mean? It's like you have ideas. Everything starts off as an idea. The suit that you have on, someone thought that up and brought it into reality. So I'm just trying to understand, like, how does the will, or how does that will play into that theory?
There is a blind interplay, and this is more now beyond the metaphysics of things. The metaphysics, because the book, as I said, is a very big book. Okay, it's not a small book.
Yeah, that's a murder weapon for sure, man.
Definitely murder weapon status. So it goes in the way you would expect a German philosopher to go into these things rather thoroughly. Okay, and it covers the interplay of all the different forces from his particular understanding. Now, what you're asking is, there's this will, you're creating things, and your manifestation into it's a drive, and so on and so forth. He would say that these things are not directional, that they're not really going anywhere. That my creating of a YouTube channel is in the whole cosmos of time doesn't mean a damn thing, and that your life and my life doesn't really mean a damn thing. Just like this pen pushing down to the earth, and then the electromagnetic forces pushing it back up, doesn't really mean a damn thing. It's just going to keep on doing this blind, crazy dance forever and ever and ever and ever. Now, again, that's why it's analogous to the Buddhist philosophies. This guy's like almost like a German Buddhist, but not at all in the same kind of a tradition. He's coming at it, obviously, the way we're talking about it. This does not sound like Eastern talk. This is very Western, right, in its approach. But the same conclusion is reached. Just like Buddha said, the world is all suffering and it's all Maya. That's the Maya part is the representation part, which is that the world is just a dream. It's just an appearance. You don't really know what the pen is. You just know that it appears to you, right? You can't really get behind it. It's just what appears to you. And you come with a certain interface, and that interface does what it does. And then it says, okay, the world is suffering also. Now we're talking to the will part, and that the result or the cause of all this suffering is your desires. In other words, the blind drive, the blind play of will against will is what causes all the suffering in the world. Okay? And it's his particular philosophy is called a pessimistic philosophy because he looks at the world as being more of a place of suffering than not. So I answered your question in terms of like, okay, well, it all doesn't mean anything, is what I was like, all this drive, the desire, the manifestation is just nothing. Doesn't really matter. The suit, the YouTube channel is just vanity upon vanity is vanity, you know. To quote.
Okay, so I get what you're saying. So in this regard, the will is just a blind drive. That's basically it's like the forces of nature that is, I guess, doing a ballet or an explosion. It's going to do that regardless. Just like someone that's born today, you know, they're going to go through certain thought patterns, and they're going to have certain emotions that they feel throughout their life, and that every human is going to experience. So it's basically like an evergreen type of thing, right? Where it occurs to everyone, but there is no there's no real I guess direction. It's just there. The experience between humans, everyone gets mad. Everyone's going to get sad. That particular will is just a force that doesn't give a shit about any person, any one person, but it's going to affect us all the same.
So goes the view, right? As this is one particular metaphysical and then epistemological and then aesthetic and ethical point of view of the world, right? Mm-hmm. But it is a logical progression beginning from the view. World is will, representation, look, where do you end up? It's just blind will against will. So fighting your neighbor or gravity versus rigidity.
So the point that you made prior to me getting on, where you said cultivating the ability to pull yourself back.
That's the special part.
Yeah. Okay. So
that's where the juice is, right? In other words, the juice is not in the will.
Yeah.
The special thing, the magic, okay, is in cultivating the ability to pull yourself away from the dance. Be like, I'm not going to participate in this dance. And obviously, you're not going to be able to withdraw yourself 100%. That's called death or something like that, right? But there is an extent to which, number one, you can begin to see it. And then number two, you can begin to cultivate actual modes of perception. And when I say the first C that I said was seeing intellectually, right? You see intellectually that, hey, the world is just blind desire against blind desire, blind force against blind force, and explosions and this and that. But guess what? There's some magic in consciousness that he has the ability to see the dance that's going on. Okay, even though it too is part of the dance. Right? But he has the ability to see the dance, and then it can actually even begin to pull away from the dance and watch the dance happen. And that the further away you can pull yourself away from the dance is the walk of ethics. That is the ethical walk, just like with Buddhism. So a life of asceticism is what they call it. It's more like some people, asceticism and renunciation. That's the extreme way of putting it. In other words, being a monk, right? In other words, a monk is at the top of the hierarchy in terms of their ethics. The ethics of this kind of philosophy says, go be a monk, right? Then if you're not going to be a monk, you should at least in your consciousness be a monk, right? Don't give up the material goods and all that stuff, but in your mind, you should be a monk. You should not be thinking that you're going to get anything out of participation in this dance of blind will against blind will. You need to separate yourself from it. The magic that you are able to separate yourself from it is where all the happiness and all this stuff comes in.
Whew. Oh man, I think I burned at least 1,000 calories doing all this thinking, bro. Like it's I mean, your streams are rather heavy, man, but I think it's needed very much so.
Yeah, it's a heavy stream, and as such, it is what it is. It's not going to get as many views, but I'll continue down this path in terms of what I reads, which is what I'm calling it right now, right? This is just part one, and we'll get crazier with it. And those who like to do, again, like as I said, okay, people come over to YouTube and they say all kinds of things about what they think they deserve, the kind of respect they should get, blah blah blah. But the thing is, if you don't understand that you're a human being and that you need to be striving for human excellence, then why the hell are you complaining about anything?
Exactly.
You deserve exactly what you get, MFR. Okay? If you think that these things, if this is not the load that you're willing to carry, and you think this is the load for Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and the rest of them, but you want to get the respect of a man, then F you. Right? That's my basic blatant whatever. That's what I'm saying. And then again, the kind of people who come over to this side and listen to my stuff, it's like Kevin Samuels will say, like you need to like not. It's not for everybody, right? Like his whole high value thing, right?
Yeah.
High value is not for everybody. And if you want to do, just to continue the Kevin Samuels track, you want to do 50-50, or you want to do this, or you want to take that, you want to complain, like you're gonna get those outcomes, right? So if you want, from my particular perspective, where I'm more about the intellectual and creative pursuits and business and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
If you think you're going to get respect and you're going to be a human being, but you're going to think that all those, Moses and all those other people are different from you, then you don't deserve a damn thing. Okay? No, you should see yourself as Moses, as Plato, as all those people. If you cannot at least push the load in that direction, or as the Christians will say, pick up your cross and bear it, then you don't deserve a damn thing. You're just complaining on YouTube.
What would you say? Because the thing is, I see what you're saying, because there seems to be a disconnect between a lot of people and their own consciousness and their own understanding of where they're at in the universe. There's little to no, there's little to no thinking of deep principles, and especially in this culture that we're in right now. And I think to what you were saying, that frame of mind stems from that lack of what's the word I'm looking for?
Perhaps accountability, responsibility taking.
Well, no, when you basically when you actually look into yourself, when you actually take an accountability. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. So I think if we had people in this country that actually questioned their roles in their lives and question how their lives arise at the point that it currently is at, whether that be at the top of the pyramid, at the bottom. And I'm speaking this is coming from experience. You know what I mean? Like, I've had many years where I had to basically, take a step back, do a reset, figure out, okay, what's going on around me, take an account for what I've done, positive and negative, to get to a certain point in my life. So I'm actually I guess explaining my awakening, I suppose. I mean, not to say that I'm freaking I've reached nirvana yet, anything like that, but I guess I'm explaining how I got about to where I'm at now, as opposed to what I see in the world, right? Because you have someone out picketing and saying that I'm oppressed and blah 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 blah, right? But have you done any self-improvement in your life? Have you actually, tried to go out, maybe, and better yourself, instead of saying the white man got me down, or the same thing with, like, a lot of red pill rage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it all goes back to, self-improvement, getting your shit together from a mental standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a physical standpoint, and having a foundation that you can build off of prior to you stepping out into the world and trying to fix it. I think a lot of people are trying to brace the world on their shoulders and in a vat of quicksand.
100%. I have a video on I was talking to this other content creator called Dr. Thunder, and I have a video called, From PUA to Spirituality. And that basically, I think I was talking to Ramil as well when I said that what the manosphere is about, not the content of the videos in the manosphere, but what it is about is like 0.0000001% about women. In other words, the complaint about women, right? But that really, even though it's flipped around in terms of the content, the videos is 99.99999% content about women, okay? But you start out that way. People are looking for some kind of improvement with women, because that's usually one of the key ways in which dissatisfaction manifests itself in the lives of men, okay? So they come over here and they're looking for pickup lines. They're looking for, how do I do this? How do I do that? In other words, they're looking for improvement of these particular skills. And then they start hearing, or they start gathering that, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I need to learn this kind of game, or maybe I need to go to the gym. Maybe I need to work out more. Maybe I need to read more. Maybe I need to do these other kinds of things, right? Mm. And when you go low down and down the rabbit hole, you're going to start getting into even like, oh, no fap and this and that. In other words, you're going to start ascending up. In other words, it's a different, what I showed here is I showed from metaphysics down to politics and, politics and human relationships, okay? Because we know that that's what politics are about, right? So over here, they come in for the politics of male and female relations, okay? And then they start climbing up to the point with ethics and no fap and so on and so forth. And they end up in the land of spirituality. Is where you find out that that's where you were going the whole time. You started out coming here thinking you were looking for game and PUA stuff. And then you end up saying, oh, crap, it really is about me carrying my cross, if I were to use a Christian analogy. It really is about me, okay, getting my S together. It really is about me becoming a better version or the best version that I need to be, not even because of the reason that I was coming into here in the first place. It's not so that I can do that so I can get this, okay? right? It's not so you could do it so you can get more women. No, that's not what it's about at all. But that is the natural progression. And it's fine that 99.999% of those videos are on the other end, but even if you start there, you're going to move progressively from that point and you're going to end up at this other point. That's the way, again, if you follow it religiously, as they say, right, then you will get to this other point. And yeah, so it's out there. It's out there in Dr. Thunder was the person I was talking to, and he kind of brought that up, and we kind of fleshed it out a little bit, and I put a little clip on my channel there. So this really is.
It's almost like you're graduating pretty much, going grade to grade, and then the doctorate is the whole spirituality portion of it, where you actually have to face yourself and realize that ain't nobody coming here to save you. Like, straight up, you basically you're here by your damn self, and if you don't build your own safety net, you're crashing to the ground.
Exactly, exactly. And the thing about the American life, and if you talked about people not having a certain because look, America has always been a particular kind of society, okay, and through time we've lost touch with what it really actually is and should have been, okay, but it was never something about this kind of studying. This is European stuff. This is German stuff, or deep spirituality is also more on the Eastern side of things, okay. Um, and just as a tangent, you know, whenever you win a war on one plane, you typically lose it on the other plane. What do I mean by that?
You mean like conqueror coming in and wiping out the previous traditions?
Yeah, so that is the flip of things that tends to happen, where you know you have, first of all, you have the conqueror, and then you're gonna have his sons are gonna be more like administrators, and then you're gonna have like philosophers, and then you're gonna have people who are just pure like estheticians in terms of like just enjoying of the whatever, and then you're gonna get weak, and then a new conqueror is gonna come in. Yeah, that cycle is implied, but what I'm really saying here is this: when, for example, let's say the West comes through with its materialism and its ships and steel, okay, and conquers the East, simultaneously it's losing a spiritual battle with the East. Okay. In other words, you cannot win at all fronts. What I mean is this, okay?
Okay.
And that's why you have apps nowadays talking about mindfulness and all this kind of stuff. Like the superpower of the East has always been the power of consciousness, okay? We talk about Buddha being one of the first and most powerful psychologists, okay? And they've been doing this concept. They know about consciousness way more than the West ever did. Okay, so while you are conquering them on the physical plane, they are conquering your mind, up to the point now where we are literally turning to the East and being like, teach me, how do I be happy, right? Make meditation apps. How do I do yoga and this and that? Like, am I wrong?
You're right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, because if you just look around at our culture, you know, everyone is getting more and more neurotic by the day. You know, there's always some commercial pushing some pill that's going to make you happy. It's going to change and revolutionize your life. And it's a very cold, callous approach to even health, right? You injecting poisons into someone, and basically saying, though, this is going to prevent disease. However, it's going to cause several others. Without any connection to the actual, I guess, biomechanics of how the body actually works from like a nutrition standpoint, right? It's devoid of spirit, of acknowledgement of okay, this guy is maybe he comes in for depression or something like that, right? You know, instead of, okay, what are you eating? What type of, you know, what are you doing on the daily? Are you getting sunlight? Are you drinking water? What are you reading? Are you doing meditation? Are you doing some type of practice on the daily that can bring you out of your state? Do you actively have goals? You know, from a practical standpoint, that sounds like, you know, it's a wholesome approach compared to, you know, what we have prescribed to in our society, where, oh yeah, we're going to go ahead and just give you 10 SSRIs and hopefully hope for the best. Hopefully you're not going to, you know, hang yourself from your doorknob later tonight, Jeffrey Epstein yourself. And I think that yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, there's I would go as far as to say the soul of the nation is pretty much voided at this point, you know.
Well, the thing is, even for example, like even within, so let me go back and I'll state two things. When you say the soul of the nation is aborted, well, you have an obscure corner of YouTube where people are over here sitting and talking about it. You have also many other places, right, where people are talking about it. And just like the unspecialist here says, there's loyal 27 people in here watching this, right? And in the East Coast, I don't even know what time it is right now. Definitely past midnight in the East Coast. So whenever you say something like that, there's always the reality that there is another side of people that know this and that are practicing something different. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, but it is unfortunate. I mean, it is just the case that yes, you know, when you win one war, you cannot win at all fronts. In other words, you're going to win physically and economically and militarily. You're going to lose spiritually, and you're going to need to then turn around and try to catch up. Okay. But that's the masses. It's not every individual. There are individuals within the society that, even though the society won militarily, they haven't forgotten and they've always had the ability to still keep a hold of all other aspects. Right?
So when you say like lose, right? Hold on, let me get this straight. So when you say lose that war from a spiritual standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when from the establishment of Western society and conquering different civilizations around the world, would you say that there is a replacement for that spirituality? So it's not seen as a loss, it's an active takeover, right? Where someone that is steeped in like a Western point of view doesn't even have that connection. I guess I'm trying to see like that there is a acknowledgement, right? Somewhat acknowledgement of that. However, it's a negation of it at the same time, and that there's a new belief that's rolled in. You know what I mean? Like there's a active denial of the previous
regime that was conquered, or when I say previous, I'm talking about the other, right? Let's say we just keep it within the West and the East, broadly defined as, you know, the West which we know, and then the East, let's say, which is kind of mainly centered in India in terms of the whole kind of Eastern spirituality is an Indian
Yeah.
thing, right? They're all Buddhists over there. Buddha was an Indian, right?
So,
So,
I guess this is what I'm trying to understand. I guess the source of the neuroticism, I believe, could be the active denial of the spirituality portion of the human experience.
yes, it tends to be that way. It tends to be that way, and people like Jordan Peterson have noted this particular point that people, and we've heard of like the 12-step programs, right? And in terms of people giving up addictions and so on and so forth, that it always comes out to some kind of an acknowledgement of some kind of a spiritual thing or a higher power or whatever they call it, in order for them to give up that addiction, in order for them to give up the neuroticism and so on and so forth, right? So somehow it always ends up that way. And if you don't acknowledge it, and here's something I want to say, it's not like the West, okay, doesn't have its spiritual traditions, both in the obvious places where you find it or in the not so obvious places where you can find it. Like Plato, for example. Plato was a very, very spiritual kind of a person. Nietzsche said that Christianity is Platonism for the masses. As a matter of fact, it actually is. So the whole idea of the good being some kind of a thing that exists outside of us, some kind of a notion of the good, and those kinds of things, very Platonic ideas. Okay, Plato was very much of a mystic. Okay, he was a very mystical kind of guy. And even if you look at the writings of what he was writing about Socrates, okay, the very beginnings of the chapters of one of his books, Plato's Republic, one of the more popular ones.
Yeah, I read the cliff notes.
He was saying, I mean, Socrates was saying some basic stuff like, okay, what in terms of keeping your diet clean, in terms of why medicine is crap. Okay, we're talking about 1,000 years before Jesus here. Okay, like in other words, these things are not new. Okay, so it's not like, but it's a question of what do you as a society focus on. In other words, you're always going to have the people who know this stuff. You're always going to have a Plato and a Socrates and a Jesus and a this and a that. But is that what you're focusing on, or are you focusing on something else, right? So, but you cannot. Unfortunately, you can't eat your cake and have it. You can't have it all. So the East, for all intents and purposes, for this analogy I was getting here, they focused heavily on their Buddhas and their so on and so forth, and their mastery of subjective consciousness, while the West tended to focus on something else. But when the West now conquered in this physical stuff, now everyone is turning and trying to find a yoga mat so they can feel whole, right? So who won? Who won at the end of the day? It's like you conquered me, but now I'm in your head, though. I conquered your head. I conquered your mind. I conquered your spirit. You're empty without my teachings, is what the East will be saying.
So, do you think there is an active push from East versus West perspective, right? So, if you have a populace of people that don't have a connection to the nature, that don't have a connection to 1,000 years of evolution that has been passed on from shaman to shaman to tribe to tribe. They've lost that essence of what it means to be a human. Would you say that from a governing standpoint, that particular populace would be a bit more easily influenced, a bit more easily riled up through emotions?
Yeah, from that particular perspective. Yeah, you may not be able to take down their walls and their weapons, right? But yes, you can fuck with their heads. Right?
So would you say that you know, the deliberate destruction of the old ways, quote unquote, old ways, was or is deliberate from a I guess a governing standpoint.
The destruction of the old ways was deliberate from a governing standpoint.
From a I guess a ruling class standpoint. There we go. So the denial of spirituality, right? The denial of the connection to the universe and principles of nature. And
let me ask you this: Are you talking about a particular group of people now?
Well, not a particular group of people. I'm just speaking in general. As it just I guess I'm trying to flesh out an idea of whether or not this, because there is a deliberate takeover, right? There's a deliberate whitewashing of history and man's connection with nature. I guess what I'm trying to understand is, there has to be a connection of that whitewashing to the governing of masses, right?
There is a
if you look at what happened with the Bolshevik revolution and how Lenin basically worked hand in hand with Pavlov, and basically wanted to turn people into their base nature.
Yeah.
Which he accomplished through throwing the Russian people into famine. Basically stripping them of all logic and reason, and turning people at each other's neck, based off of the principles of dialectic
materialism.
Dialectic materialism, meaning that from an anthropologic standpoint, all conflict is only advancement that can be made from a human standpoint is through conflict. Conflict at every level. So I was tying this back into the idea we were talking about. So basically, removing man's connection to him being human, removing man's connection to being actual a higher being, allowed for the control, allowed for the manipulation. You can actually program an individual that lost that connection. So from, would you say that is, I guess I'm trying to figure out what portion of that takeover, right, of that East versus West, or that West versus East takeover is deliberate, as opposed to something that occurs naturally throughout time?
I tend to think that there's very little that's deliberate, but that things have a pattern, right? Just like in your particular life, in your life history, there's quite little that's deliberate. There is a story that is always told in retrospect, though, and it's usually always told in retrospect about why you did things and how you did things and so on and so forth. So if you blow that up into history, let's take, for example, and then I'll start attacking the many things which you said. By attacking, I don't mean assailing, I mean, addressing.
Yeah, I got it.
If we take human history, I just talk about the human individual, I say that, as we know, we're very, very unconscious, right? And I like to make it clear by the fact that that you're not controlling your breathing, you're not controlling your heart, you're not controlling your blood oxygenation, so on and so forth, and just about everything that constitutes you, you're not in control of. And same thing with society. There are many, many ways to draw a line through history, looking backwards. It's always looking backwards to say what happened. So you say, well, why did X conquer Y? Okay, there are at least four lines to draw. Okay, one is the great man of history line, right, which talks about gods, generals, and kings and stuff like that. Okay, X conquered Y because Napoleon raised up the army or whatever, and he was a great man and he had his general. Caesar did this or whomever, right? Moses came and he took the people out of, right? That's the great man line. Okay, that's one way of talking about historical deliberation or things happening deliberately as a result of human design. Another one is to talk about the economic and technological aspect. X conquered Y because X developed and stumbled upon this particular thing called gunpowder, or X built these particular boats and then they were able to do commerce with these other people. It made them rich, and then they used that money to make weapons, and then they conquered these people. In other words, technology and economics, right? And that's another explanation. And we're talking about the same people. In other words, all these things happen together. Okay, that's the whole point that we're getting at here. Both the fact that there was a general and a whatever, plus the fact that they also had blah blah blah, is another story to tell. And then there's the story that what I call journalists like to tell. In other words, the philosopher people. Okay, they will say it's because of the writings of this particular person. It's because of the ideas that were promulgated, right? Or this particular society conquered over that society because, you know, Nietzsche said this, and then they started implementing this idea. It was, in other words, it's that realm of the mental realm. People started reading this, and that's why they did that. So I've just gone to only three in terms of why something happened. And then you can tell these stories, but they're always told retrospectively. But in fact, while it was happening, okay, no one was really in control. No one was really taking the reins. Now people do know how to take advantage of certain things, though. And let me give a shout out real quick to people on the Cash App. Lord Smooth, shout out. Thank you very much for hitting up the Cash App. Also, BC and Lou, I believe that's Commandant Lou. If you guys are still in the stream, I very, very, very much appreciate it right now. The fact that you guys are putting this thing in here, because it serves as encouragement for the fact that this is the kind of content that you guys would like to see. It helps encourage me to come out here and share these ideas with you guys. Now, so those are the three things that I have to say about that whole, whether it's deliberate or not. And then there are many things that you would take. I was
could you go back over the three I guess what would it be, like modes of societal transformation, I suppose. I don't know. Yeah. So
you have
the last one was mental, right? Go ahead.
The great man story. Okay, that's
that's
your general, your Caesar, your Napoleon.
Napoleon. Okay, gotcha.
Why did it happen? It's because this guy did something. Okay.
Yep.
And they're generals, they're politicians, and so on and so forth. And then you have your socio-economic. Well, not so much social, because the social was going to be the fourth one, which is a little bit more complex. Or I would say demographic one. You have these demographics. You know, the people were getting, the age of the population was changing, whatever. But number two, after the great man, is the technical/economic. In other words, the cotton gin was invented, and that's why something happened, right? Gunpowder was invented, and that's why something happened.
Gotcha,
and also economics, right? They started making these kinds of boats, therefore they were able to do this, that, and the other. The Phoenicians were able to do a lot of great things in the Mediterranean, in the ancient Mediterranean, because they made great boats and they were able to do this kind of commerce, and they got a lot of money, and with that money they were able to rally up troops and pay their laborers, and that's why it happened. Okay.
Gotcha.
And then the third one is, okay, why did this happen, or why did the West win? It's like, well, because John Locke said this stuff, and Adam Smith said this stuff, and he put these ideas in the head, or Karl Marx wrote something, right? That's why it happened, right?
So I guess from that standpoint, the the disconnect with that spiritual aspect is pretty much inherited. Like, it's not, yeah, I see what you mean. So it's not deliberate anymore at that point, because it's kind of it's been grown through generations, right? It's not something that people are swimming in it, right? They don't realize that
Yeah,
it's water.
a pattern that happens, and there are patterns and there are cycles. As I said, you win in one way, you lose in the other way.
Yeah, I got you.
And the other people come in, they win that way, they lose the other way. You can look at it as just like a panoply or kaleidoscope of many different shifting layers of things, right? And any one person, was Napoleon really in control of something? Was Caesar really in control of something? Was anybody really in control of anything? Right? No.
Yeah, but I guess from a sociological, I always fuck that word up, but from a social standpoint, right? From someone that's basically holding the reins of power, right? That actually can influence culture, can influence economic policies.
Yeah.
Would you say that there is there's an interplay between those I guess views of history, and man's desire to rule or conquer, or to seek power?
So, if I understand you correctly, there is this person, he wants power and he wants to do certain things. But he also has to contend with the demographics, the economics, the technology, and all those other factors, right? Which also move history, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing that you draw from looking at these 3 or 4 modes of historical posteriori rationalization, looking back and drawing up a story about what happened and why it happened. The first next step is to say, okay, well, it's a synthesis, right? It's all these things and how they influence each other. Okay. And then you immediately start finding that it's impossible to really tell that story. Because it's hard enough to tell the one story of the great man's story, or the technology story, right? Or the idea story, the philosophy story, right? To start talking about how these 3 things interplay, that's a messy soup, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
So it's like saying, for example, and this is Tolstoy who put it this way, and shout out to the people in the chat, by the way. I see there's still people in the chat here, and let me get a 1 if you guys are still awake.
And I don't want to keep you up all night, man. Actually, I gotta get some sleep, man. I gotta get up early in the morning. So I know you probably wrapping up pretty soon. But yeah, man, this is a very thrilling conversation, man. I really don't get to dive deep into ideas like this. I mean, I think I've definitely sprouted some new brain cells tonight.
Let me go ahead and finish that thought, and then
go ahead
real quick, and then we'll start wrapping this up. So basically, it was Tolstoy that said, and again regarding this complicated interplay of human beings. So once you get many human beings, one thing that people know is that they're different from one human being. In other words, you may be able to control one child, but you know that when you have like 3 or 5 children together, it's a different beast. It's a totally different psychology. Same thing.
The madness of crowds and
all of that. It's a totally different kind of psychology. So some people will want the point of view that says it's the resultant, or let me not use engineering terms. It's the synthesis of these different things that play. Okay, that's what really causes the history. All I got to do is find how the general was affected by the technology, and how the technology was affected by the general, and the economy was affected by how the writing and what caused it. And then I'm going to be able to all synthesize it and find the direction. The people that do that don't understand how complex systems work, in the sense that a complex system tends not to be additive that way. In other words, a mob is not just a combination of different people. It's a totally different thing now. Okay, it's a totally different beast with very weird other behaviors that you cannot even begin to grasp. So Tolstoy used this example of like an army, okay, and you have these quantifiable things like the who has the flank, the size of the army, the gunpowder that they have, and the directions in which they're attacking each other. Okay, but how do you quantify such a thing as fighting spirit, right?
Mm.
Which is something that does play a big part in battles, and battles do play a big part in historical movements in general, right? Where is the fighting spirit parameter in your equation? Okay, so in other words, you start finding out that you really don't have a lot of handle on things. Okay, and it's almost like in line with what we were talking about earlier, where it's like these blind forces playing against each other, do a very, very complex dance. Don't think you have a handle on them. Now, to your point about deliberation again, though, people have studied through history and formulated certain things about human psychology. Do you know the book called The Brave New World by Aldous Huxley?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a while since I read it.
Okay. Brave New World is a way of turning people into that animalistic thing that you said. Okay. Just like you can turn them, you can get them at their throats via famine, starvation, so on and so forth, take away the human dignity and then control them that way. Okay. That is the 1984 mode or the Stalin mode, right? And you know 1984, right? The Orwell.
George Orwell, yeah.
So the George Orwell 1984 or the Stalin mode is to kind of use brutality to get you into your animal phase and then control you that way. But really, the slicker way is the Brave New World way. Okay. Both take you to an animal stage, but the Brave New World way is to remove your morality from you, is to give you, it wasn't Soma in Brave New World, was it? Is to give you, is to satisfy all your worldly pleasures. Again, going to this thing about the will and the desires, right? As opposed to you recognizing the dance for being a crazy dance and not wanting to participate, right? It says, here, free sex, free love, ecstasy, nightclubs, happiness, right? Let's give people everything they want. Let's implant them with chips. Let's give them universal basic income. I'm not necessarily making counter arguments to these things. I'm just saying that this also will lead you, okay, the masses, that is, it doesn't have to lead any particular individual, because particular individuals can slide out of the group in terms of slide out of getting in, some people will always by definition be outliers, right?
Yeah.
But these things will slowly lead the masses to becoming animals again. You don't have to put a gun to their head to make them animals and control them, or put them in the pressure cooker like 1984 or like Stalin or whatever. You don't have to starve them to make them animals.
You can just put them on farms and feed them, and
exactly.
and when they get fat enough, you just go ahead and tag them and line them up to the slaughterhouse.
Exactly. You can do that. That is slicker. It looks nicer. There's less turmoil. Okay. Hey, you go. Guess what you want. Give them bread and circuses, as the Romans would say. Right. Bread and circuses is another way of controlling people. The Brave New World method. Okay. It's another way of getting them into the animalistic stage so that you can control them. Okay. And then there's a third part of
just one second though. I just want to ask you a question in regards to the synthesis of the from a historical standpoint. When you synthesizing those three areas of looking back on history, the great man, economic and technological, and then the actual
the philosophical, the writings,
the writings and ideas of a particular era or time. So basically, taking all that together, and then you have historians that will go back and try to put try to use those three areas and come up with some kind of solid story of history.
Mhm.
Where does that I guess what does that drive to seek power fit into that equation? I'm not sure is that where you were going. I didn't mean to cut you off because there was an idea that you were trying to finish up. So I just wanted to get that out because I was gonna lose it. But
Yeah, people have
yeah,
studied the patterns of history and the ways in which these things happen. And for example, Machiavelli written books such as The Prince,
yeah,
in order for you to try to take the reins as much as you can and take advantage of and ride the wave. But you're not necessarily creating the wave. You know what I'm saying? It's saying, here's how you ride the wave of these patterns. But you're not creating the wave with your surfboard. You're just going to be like, hey, here's how I ride this wave. Okay? Here's how I ride the wave of historical, economic.
okay. So this actually does. So this ties back into, I guess this principle, I guess, ties back into the will, being that from historical or from this standpoint, you have the strong man, then you have economic and technological, and then the philosophical. Those are all forces that
Fighting against
are
and you're just doing your thing.
just doing their things, and that actually ties back into it that being the will.
Mm-hmm.
That being, yeah, okay, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead. I just go ahead and finish up the
Yeah.
what you were saying.
And that's why, generally speaking, a good, and again, that's a very thick book. I just did like a very short kind of like whatever on it. But a good metaphysical point of view, okay, will flow through ethics, aesthetics, politics, how to live your life, everything, right? And then flow back. And you can take, it's almost like a lens that you can take and look at the world through. And I said, everybody has a lens.
What was the? I'm sorry, I didn't even cut you off. I was trying to figure out what was the point. I can't remember. What was the point you was making in regards to the drive to seek power? What was you just made it?
You had asked what was. I was like, okay, no, the drive to seek power aspect is, and how does it interplay with all these other factors? I say that people study these factors and how they create waves, and people have
that's it right there. That's it right there. Got you. Okay, so that's the part I was trying to remember. Okay, so basically, it's like pulling back, riding the wave. You're riding the wave, which is the synthesis of those particular areas, and the manipulation or the drive to seek power.
So the power,
you're riding that wave.
The power is the ocean. The power is the wave. Okay, and you just got to know that you ride it. You're not a god, right?
Mm-hmm.
All you can do is ride the wave. The knowledge of how the waves operate, that has been codified through people studying the patterns and how they interact and so on and so forth. And then you have people writing either, as I said, Machiavelli, or people writing the 48 Laws of Power, or whatever these other people like to read these days, right? But you're not really creating the power, just like you're creating the ocean wave. You're just riding it. And those things are useful in that regard as well. There was one last aspect that touches upon everything that you said, which is, and this is to pinpoint specifically the philosophical, the writings aspect of things, because at least in the most recent part of the Western trajectory, the trajectory of Western civilization, we talk about the Enlightenment, right? That's the fairly recent, fairly new, right? The Enlightenment, and then you have the founding of America, and we say we worship at the altar of Hobbes and John Locke, right? So this is a very much of a philosophy school, right? That says America is about these documents, but we also know that it's about 1,000 different things playing in each other, right? And that no one was really in control of. But the writings, those documents, the Enlightenment, if you will, naturally led to a certain point that we're in right now, okay? Vis-a-vis the loss of spirituality. Nietzsche wrote that God is dead, okay? He wrote this in the latter part of the 18th century. He said, God is dead, okay? Now, why did he say that? And he said that also as a lament, like, we have killed God and it's a really, really bad thing. And he said that there was not going to be enough water in the world to wash the blood off of our hands. In other words, here's what happened. Science, okay, by its emphasis on truth, killed our ability to actually have a human will and drive that goes above and beyond the animalistic. Okay, it killed our ability to contemplate the sublime. Everything.
And just one point on that, I think that is I think that is a direct. I'm trying to put this. That right there, what you just said, was directly responsible for the garbage ass art that was produced during Bolshevik Russia. And I think it's the same thing with the garbage ass art that we're producing now. You know, like, because there's a disconnect, a major disconnect from, you know, that force, that, you know, art which speaks to the soul of every man. There's a major disconnect, right, from art that's produced from that source. The source being, you know, whatever you want to call it. I guess the ether that connects us all, that spans different eras of time.
Yes.
There's something, right, where, like, you produce a song, right? There's that rhythm that's there, that's basically going to affect someone living, you know, 2020, or someone living in 1972, or
Yes.
even beyond. You know, that beat, that rhythm is timeless. As opposed to
art and propaganda.
What's that?
So that's one of the main differences between art and propaganda, is that art is timeless, okay? And art is timeless and it sends a message, okay? But propaganda sends a message, but it's not timeless, it's not sublime. And that is mainly because, okay, art, and I
don't want to cut you off, because I kind of cut you off with that point. But you was on track with finishing up an idea prior to me making that introduction with the disconnect of art, with the, I guess, the comparison between art that comes from a spiritual grounding, as opposed to something that's completely disconnected from that. And
it's all like I put here: metaphysics, ethics, aesthetics, and that's I put aesthetics there, right? And I didn't say much about it, but the ability to flow from relationships and what you should do in politics, aesthetics, ethics, all the way to metaphysics, back down again, is what is the power that philosophy gives you. So I was talking about the Enlightenment, and that it, as a result, to create a political space for this thing we call science, Okay, and I'm just giving the philosophy story, right?
Yeah.
The writing story. As a result of creating something that gives room for this thing called science, we took God out to the backyard and shot him in the head. Okay.
Yella.
I felt like saying that. Yeah, that's just to put
Yeah.
a nice graphic image in your head. But that's
Yeah,
what
that's
we
pretty
did.
intense, man. Yeah.
That's what we did. We were like, we're going to take away all the supernatural out of things,
Mm.
suck all the air out of the room, and now we find it difficult to live with ourselves because there is a reason why cross-culturally and in all these different arenas, the grandeur of the spiritual form of aesthetics and the spiritual mode of being and the God, okay, is ubiquitous. In other words, it's the reason why it's all over the place. Why it's there. Yes, ha ha ha, an execution. Yes, it was an execution, so that we can say, hey, church, stop stopping Galileo from doing his science. Let's create a political order that is based on rationality and reason. But guess what? Reason cannot tell you how to live. Reason
Mm.
cannot give your life purpose. Reason cannot give you, that's why, there's nothing wrong. There's everything logical about, hey, I think the Jews are the problem, so let's go ahead and execute all these people, right? Reason will not, in other words, when you go pure rationality, pure logic, you just open Pandora's box, you open hell. And this is what Nietzsche was saying when he's like, we killed God, and there's not going to be enough water to wash the blood that's going to be coming. Okay? Because the thing that kept us decent, moral, and loving of each other, and it even states in some books, okay, or let's just use the Christian tradition. After all, we're in the West, and we're all Christians of one way, of one sort or the other, by the way, whether you believe it or not. Okay, you can't be growing up in the West and think you're not Christian unless you're specifically Muslim or something else, but still the same kind of Judeo-Christian / Islamic line. Same thing, same stuff coming out of the Mediterranean, right? We're all Mediterraneans in that way. So there is coming out of that particular line that love your neighbor for the sake of God, love one another for the sake of God. Because we really can't find a logical reason why we should be loving one another. You see see the picture I'm painting here, okay? That it is hard to come up with a set of ethics, okay, a set of grandiose art and grandeur and of purpose and beauty in life when you executed God behind the barn, just so that you can go for this material science type thing and create a political regime that was free of the influence, the undue influence, correctly, the undue influence of certain kind of mysticism or religion and so on and so forth, right? So the
So
enlightenment.
would you say this? I guess this. I guess the murder of God sparked um, I guess sparked some type of, I guess, explosion of moral, what is it, moral relativism. So
Mhm. Yeah.
where basically, morals are brought down from on high and down to a human perspective, in that
Yeah.
you can do what you basically do as thou wilt, as one would say.
Yes.
That's, yeah,
So
gotcha.
that is definitely the result of the execution. Okay, is that now it's no longer on high. The guiding star is not up there. It is now down here, and you
Mm,
can and then now the stomach can begin to philosophize, and the stomach is like, hey, let's say utilitarian philosophy, which is, hey, you know what? I'm okay, you're okay, as long as we share the pie. Let's just figure out how to share the pie. That becomes your morality, right? Which is
mm,
more or less capitalism. Okay. In other words, you start to focus on economics now as morality. Whatever shares the pie nicely, whatever is fair, right? That kind of thing. That's what's good. Or you can start to do things like, I'm going to be a rebel, right? And the good is to balk at the system. I'm going to be the artist that, the counterculture, right? The rebel type mentality, okay? And that is the only way I can be respected. I can get authenticity and realness through charisma. In other words, it's come this worship of charisma being the source of the good, right? Now, relativism has a very, very, very tricky, there's a tricky thing that happens with relativism. On the one hand, it says, relax, there is no objective truth, right? There is no objective good. Just relax. As long as you're okay, I'm okay, we're all okay. As long as we can share the pie, we have the social contract, right? And the myth of and I call it a myth because it really is a myth, and it's understood to be a myth. The myth from which the social contract comes from, the myth of the state of nature, right? Which then says we get our rights from the state of nature, right? The state of nature is, it's the war of all against all. Therefore, what do we want? We want life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, right? You know the story, right?
Yeah.
So that particular myth says, hey, I'm okay, you're okay, but also underlying that says we want life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. But who's to stop you from therefore saying, but I also want this and this and this and this and this and this and this, right? Right? Because it's not some kind of law of God.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Exactly. It's not a law of God. It just says, hey, let's you get life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, I get life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? But hey, how about if my pursuit of happiness involves some kinds of things which people are now starting to say it involves, right?
Yeah.
How about if I want you to give me health care? How about if I want you to give me your money? How about if I want you to accept my way of life? And
yeah, there's nothing wrong with third trimester abortion. I mean, it's healthcare.
Exactly. How about if we just kill all babies? And how about if we did this? And how if we did that? Blah blah blah. So you see, that was the Enlightenment project. Years ago, he took God out in the back, he shot him in the head. And then they're like, oh, we're gonna have rationality guide us. And some smart people, Hobbes and Locke and so on and so forth, created a system of rights by the imagination of the state of nature that says, what do you want? But what you want is an emotion. And they kept the emotions chained through I said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it can only work if you take that constitution as a religious doctrine. That's the mystery of it all. Oh, that's the contradiction. Oh, that's the.
You're absolutely right, because I mean, it's crazy how you have like stone cold atheists, right? But they say I don't believe in X, Y, I believe in God or whatever. But they have rituals. They have their belief in not believing in God is somewhat of a religion itself.
Yep.
It's like the fish swimming in the water. It doesn't know it's swimming in water. And I guess in some regards there is pretty much a repulsion of religion to a point where their own brains won't even allow them to see that they're following a religious doctrine of their own.
Yes, that is 100% true. That is 100% true. That is where first principles come from. I'm reading something in the chat right now. That's where first principles come from. Your rights end where you transgress the rights of otherwise known as non-aggression principle. Yes, but a non-aggression principle, unless you put some kind of super over rational power to it, there is no reason why I should accept it. There is no reason why I shouldn't go kill you and say, screw your non-aggression stuff. I'm taking it. I'm taking your land. I'm taking all this stuff. Okay. In other words, if you take the Constitution as a religious doctrine, then it can work. Okay. That is why it is important to have these rituals and all these kinds of things. And, we're going to venerate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all this kind of things. And As a matter of fact, we do those kinds of rituals and practices and so on and so forth. But some people like to snub their noses at it because they think that those things don't actually have power. But the people who really know that those are the things that breathe life into those things, because your people are not going to just do stuff because it makes sense. As a matter of fact, obviously not everybody can even understand the sense that it makes, right? Not everybody can understand Hobbes and Locke and the Enlightenment. No, you need for it to be like, hey, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness comes down from the Mount Sinai, and we must leave it at that. We cannot spread it out into whatever, and we can blah, blah, blah. Okay? And these are the kinds of things that the religious front, the spiritual front has enabled us to keep. But the Enlightenment had a natural progression whereby you're going to get rid of certain things, cut from underneath you the moral underpinnings of your society. You're going to get to a relativistic point of view. And I was going to mention that relativismo, that's the Italian version, I guess. Relativism has, I'm talking too fast, I'm going to say relativism, okay? But relativism has two contradictive, weird impacts on human psychology. The one is the relaxed part. And the relaxed part, the stomach, okay, and the reason I call it the stomach is because it's a Nietzschean way of kind of talking about philosophy, which is there's a philosophy of the stomach, there's a philosophy of the head, there's a philosophy of the spirit, there's these different aspects. In other words, going back to our drives and our will, okay, different wills have different stories, okay. Utilitarianism and capitalism, generally speaking, is a stomach kind of story. Okay? It's a stomach philosophy. It's about economics. It's about the storehouse, the goods, okay? And it has its own ethics and aesthetics and all that stuff, right? It'll tell a whole story about all this stuff, but really, its end is to satisfy the stomach. Okay, the stomach is good with the chill part. The stomach is good with the, hey, you're okay, I'm okay. There is no ultimate truth. There is no God. We can contract, we can interrelate as people who understand their rational self-interest, the whole utilitarian Adam Smith kind of approach, which I'm a libertarian and a capitalist myself, but I know the realm in which it exists. Okay, I know there's no God in there, right? But I know that I still need a kind of metaphysical underpinning, which I'm not going to get from my stomach. Okay. Now, on the one hand, it says relax. We're good. I'm okay. You're okay. On the other hand, it tends to produce extremism. It's weird, but guess what? Under relativism is where you're going to have people who have this thing called commitment. Okay. And I'm going to explain it in one way. Then I'm going to use particulars. Like authenticity, like I said, the rebel spirit. The rebel spirit also comes out of relativism, right? That spirit of I'm gonna be an anti whatever, the spirit of Antifa, if you will, just to use a modern example, right?
Well, I mean, just like Luciferian doctrine, like Lucifer himself, like he's the rebel is based in, relative. I always fuck the word up my country ass tongue, but relative. I can't even say it, man. I'm not even gonna try. I'm hungry and tired. So
yeah.
But yeah, it's based in that there's no truth. There's no
rebel, exactly. Lucifer being the angel and then coming down and all that kind of stuff. The thing is, relativism on the one hand, and people only see this hand every time. They only just see the chill, relaxed stomach philosophy, utilitarian, a little bit of capitalism, a little bit of Adam Smith and John Locke. Never hurt anybody. Okay. And then you have Locke and Hobbes, who were able to kind of create that nice myth, the myth of the state of nature, out of which you come out of land, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Okay, but it doesn't really have as much religious power, even though we try to give it religious power, right? By generating the documents and having rituals and so on and so forth, and constantly
hand over your head, hand over your heart, and
life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? We push it to that altar, but it doesn't have the real juice, and that's why people can come in and say, hey, how about my right to this? How about my right to that? In other words, breaking the foundations apart, right? But the other hand of relativism, which we're talking about, is that really vile, heavy kind of narcissistic commitment to an idea. Because believe it or not, when we had the mythologies, okay, the ancient the mythologies that had God in it, let's call it that, those mythologies were tempered by all kinds of things like justice and mercy, or mercy tempered justice, or all kinds of things like that. Where yes, King David was a great man, but let's show him for what he really was. Yes, he did kill his general to get the beautiful woman on top of the that he saw taking a bath, right? In other words, it gave you a full human picture of things. And in other words, you cannot get off and become a fanatic, right? Even though you can still people will become fanatics. It's always crazy people. Okay, we're not talking about crazy people here. Okay,
Yeah.
but the fact
but if you take that example right there, right, and King David killed one of his generals to take his wife from a perspective of someone that prescribes to the murder of God. They would see that particular scenario as
so like, yeah, your Bible
as
is flawed. Look at all that crap in there. It's filled with misogyny and this and that and slavery. It's like, but
well, I'm talking about specifically for that particular instance. Like, okay, he killed his general to get to his wife or whatever. That, from a perspective of a world without God, is acceptable from someone that has no moral compass. There's no boundaries in that pursuit of power. Whereas through our perspective, we recognize the hierarchy. We recognize the value of human life, and we also
it caused the downfall of David. That's why that part was added in there.
Well,
right?
no, I just paused it right there just to focus in on that particular portion. In regards to the views of, I guess, the different views between someone that cheerleads the death of God in our society, and as opposed to someone that actually has a connection to their spiritual side, or that are a proponent of having God in not only from a personal standpoint in your life, but also from a wider standpoint. So someone would see that as from I guess a spiritual standpoint, you would see that particular event as a sin. Obviously, we have a moral compass, because we can actually, I guess, empathize, right? We can,
but
we can see. Well, I didn't mean to derail your the thought, though. I just had a idea to just make it clear for myself, really. But yeah, go ahead from, I guess, where you say David killed his general.
A couple of things. Well, first of all, the moral compass comes from a tradition of these myths of the Mediterranean, let's just say, okay? And let me read something here in the chat. Isn't the greatest goal to try to effect a philosophy that benefits the most and harm the least? But all philosophies / religions have trade-offs and inherent outlier extreme consequences. 100%. So I would agree with you for sure, 100%. Now I would say that the first statement I agree with 100%. As Thomas Sowell says, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So over here, when I was talking about, and I started out, this is a book review, okay, about a metaphysical approach to things. The book is called The World is Will and Idea, okay? And opposed to that will be other metaphysical points of view, like Hegel, and I also read Nietzsche, for example, and then Immanuel Kant, and many other things, okay? Understanding fully well that they're filled with trade-offs, okay? But I know that life is short and art is long. I try to understand or gain from the perspective of tradition, art, philosophy, rationality, so on and so forth. The second part of your statement, though, about the greatest goal to benefit the most, I would have to, there's something about that, and this is, again, a temperamental thing. I'm going to admit to it that it's a temperamental thing. There's something about my temperament that balks at.
Because you can argue that Nazi Germany benefited the most, right?
Yeah, because
from that standpoint, right? I mean, well, it's killing off all the drag, the retards and Jews and anyone else that doesn't have pure Aryan blood. That's benefiting.
Pushback, which is that there are many ways to benefit the most, many ways which we may consider repulsive to benefit the most.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So that doesn't make it moral.
That's one pushback, but another pushback has to do with the fact that you don't know how to do it. In other words, things.
Yeah, you're right.
You don't know how to do it. Like the way evolution works, for example, is through a process of trial, error, repeat. And by evolution, I just mean, species in a landscape dying, getting better, some genetic mutations happening, some people surviving and others not. The surviving traits tend to move on. So the landscape is changing, okay? And then you have this backlog of legacy software and legacy hardware as well. You don't know
that's ingrained into your future decisions. But when you're talking about actually influencing policy, right? You have these ideas.
Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna make everyone the Green New Deal. We're gonna revolutionize housing. We're gonna build new buildings, and none of this shit's been done before. So you have all these great ideas and intentions, but there's no history behind it. There's nothing that solidifies your ability to act that out, or there's nothing in history that shows positive results for your ideas.
Now, again, I think George Zilla, no need to apologize in terms of retracing covered ground. I was just talking about the book review, okay? And it's perfectly fine. So what I was kind of saying, though, regarding the fact that you don't really know what to do is, let's give the devil its due. Having a goal that says, I want the best for the most is fine. Everybody has that goal, generally speaking. But it's a goal, not a system. Get what I'm saying? Now, what is the system by which you can get there? Is usually a totally different thing altogether. And the system might look very, very different. The system might be, for example, don't do anything. You get what I'm saying? The system might be, don't touch it. Okay? Like, I believe it was Lao Tzu that said, you rule a large nation like you cook a small fish, very gently. You just give it tiny nudges. In other words, a decentralized and complex system, like we were talking about the armies, for example, right? We don't know what's going on. We don't know how to quantify fighting spirit, for example, okay? The things that we may be able to quantify and control, yes, we can try. But when you talk about evolution of species, you talk about economies, it is best to let 1,000 flowers bloom, okay? And I think it's also Lao Tzu that said, oh no, it was a Mao, but in the same kind of Confucian / Lao Tzu kind of spirit, that look, you may not necessarily know what to do, and as a matter of fact, we do not know what to do. We're not that smart, okay? And we will never be that smart because these complex systems are just way too complex, and they do not follow linear trajectories, and they do all kinds of weird things, and they tend to be anti-fragile. What do I mean by anti-fragile? If you could read this book called by Nassim Taleb, he wrote the Black Swan, and also this book called Anti-Fragile, which basically means some systems need stress. Systems such as your muscles, for example, okay? You need to lift muscles and break them so that they come back stronger. In other words, the worst thing to do for your muscles is to not do anything. They atrophy, right? If you just lay in the bed and you don't stress out your bones, they atrophy. You
So
actually
so
gain stress.
so
And
basically what you're saying is that you can't sustain a complex economy just by pumping untold trillions into it.
exactly. Because you have to allow, because this is how these decentralized things work. Okay, they're very inefficient, is what I'm saying.
Mm,
As Judge Zilla said, right? They're trade-offs. In other words, you cannot have efficient and also have a positive feedback loop and something that learns and evolves. No, you trade one for the other. If you want something that learns, you're going to have you're going to need something that's decentralized. You're going to need a multi-headed hydra whereby there's a lot of information flow through the system, through each organism doing its thing and learning, interacting with the environment, right? And then gaining information. And then over time, it's hard to kill. You cannot kill it, but it is not efficient. If you want something that's super efficient and one head, you want the Chinese Communist Party, for example, not to pick on them, but very efficient, but not a lot of information flow through the system and also easy to kill, not anti-fragile. A lot of evolution or your muscles, or generally speaking, a lot of economies tend to be anti-fragile in the sense that you need for them to just go into the environment and encounter these risks and turbulence, and it actually makes them better, right? You actually need to jump and stress out your bones and create micro fractures so that your bones actually get stronger, because
mm,
laying down will kill your bones. In other words, many decentralized systems are like that, and we're just not smart enough to know the right places to put the right stress and so on and so forth. Okay.
yeah.
Now that this is just a point of view, right? And the point is, as Judge Zilla also said here, that the truths, the so-called truths of the religion, of the religious sort, right? The worshiping at the altar, let's say, of some kind of codified code and putting God above it. Yes, there is that danger. Okay, but I'll have to say, okay, at the risk of there's something, and that's why there's the esoteric and then there's the exoteric. Okay, there is something that works that the masses need, and then there's something for the other people who are not quite the masses. All are going to be trade-offs and all are going to fall short necessarily, right? But you can never quite hit the perfect bullseye. Okay, you can never quite hit the perfect bullseye. I can over here say, okay, perhaps we need some kind of a worshiping of something, because I don't really know what that thing is. Okay, but I know that rationality is not where it's at, and it's not going to give you those answers, especially when it comes to how are you going to live your life. Because when you think about it deeply enough, you're going to realize that. Okay, now this is not the kind of information that is useful to your grandma that's going to the church. No offense to anyone's grandma that goes to the church, right? She needs the church and the Bible and all that other kind of stuff. That's what's going to keep her on the straight and narrow path. And I don't want to knock her off her perch, because what Nietzsche warned against was this: hey, Mr. Highfalutin pointy hat guy, talking to people like me, people like yourself, people like Judge Zilla in the chat, say, look, just because you know certain things doesn't mean you should go telling everybody. Doesn't mean you should go knock grandma off her perch, telling her, ha ha ha, those things you're reading in that book does just this and that. You know, because you might not be able, as a matter of fact, you will not be able to give her another perch to sit on. Your particular perch is only for you. Okay, you may know that you don't hold the Bible and do the same thing she's doing, but don't be knocking off her Bible, because what are you going to replace it with? Do you have something to replace it with for her? Just because you may have replaced it with something for yourself, you have your own personal metaphysics, doesn't mean you should go around and knocking people off their perches, because you cannot create those perches for them. And you're going to need to live with the bitter consequences, is what Nietzsche was basically lamenting about. Okay, and Nietzsche was not some kind of a believer in God per se, but he was just able to see, right? Okay, here's what's going to happen. Okay, we've unlocked the Enlightenment, we've unlocked this world of rights, and we now have this stomach philosophy. Okay, good. down the line, there's going to be a bunch of blood and a bunch of chaos, and we're not going to be able to find our dignity and nobility anymore because the masses, emphasis on the masses, they need the dignity and the nobility. Okay, unless you're going to round them up in a chain and control them that way, you're going to get chaos. Either you put them in a chain or you give them dignity and nobility, which they were getting from their higher power, if you will. You take God out to the back and shoot him in the head, you're going to need to live with the consequences. But it's just trade-offs, right? No system is perfect.
So, as far as what Judge Zilla brought up in regards to doing the most good for the most amount of people, doing good for the most amount of people, I'm paraphrasing. Would you say that how would you, like, I guess, take the American Constitution, or take the Bill of Rights, right?
Okay.
I think from a, I guess, law of nature point of view, I think the Bill of Rights kind of encapsulate, I guess, human rights. Not to say that that document is basically my like a shield, right? Like, I'm not saying that if it wasn't for the Bill of Rights, then my connection to my God-given rights wouldn't exist. But what I'm saying is there's an embodiment, right? There's an embodiment of my God-given rights in that document, right? From that view, right? And tying it into what Judge Zilla said, like doing good for the most amount of people. Would you say that particular document has ingrained in it, right? Like has a historical reference point tied to it, and that's why it actually it works, as opposed to a philosophy
Yes.
of moral.
You cannot go and lecture people with the doctrines of John Locke and Hobbes and so on and so forth, and then get them to agree upon some kind of a society. No. So far, we've been talking about, again, since we've created these three kinds of modes of historical line drawing and storytelling, we've been stuck talking about the journalist part, the writings part, right? But as a matter of fact, there's a history, there is blood in terms of genetic ties, and there is economic and socioeconomic things going on, and many other reasons why the people decide to coalesce and form a nation, right? So it's not just the writings, but the writings are the equivalent of what one may call going up by Moses to Mount Sinai and bringing down the Ten Commandments. They are the kind of like the God aspect of things. And even in those writings, there's reference, as you mentioned, to and this will be in the Declaration of Independence, not necessarily in the Bill of Rights, right? Our God-given rights, okay? Because you want to tap into that whole long history and tradition that says, yeah, God, given rights, yeah, I'm done with that, right? Because this is how you can bring people together. You're not going to take them into some lecture and say, here's point one, here are the premises, and this is the conclusion, this is why you should be. It's like, no, people very much overestimate, and maybe I shouldn't say this.
Well, I guess my thing is this: there's a clear difference between our founding documents, right, and the founding documents, the Constitution of say Canada or Australia, right, where there is a recognition of every man's divinity.
The right comes from
Every,
within, as opposed to the rights being granted by the government.
exactly. So
yeah, it's
from the standpoint of doing good for the most amount of people, right? If I guess I'm trying to separate, right, the approach. One being a system or an idea or a I'm sorry, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten anything. I'm fasting right now, and I'm tired. I'm tired as hell right now. So like my brain is, I got nothing right now in my stomach. So, but basically, I'm trying to separate the approach, right? So if you have one philosophy like never been tried before, it's basically some Marxist garbage. You know, we want diversity, and we want equality, and women's rights, and blah 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 blah, and garbage, right? That has no attachment to universal law. Then you have another ideology, that recognizes man's tie to his God-given rights, and they come from within, something that's solidified through history, right? In terms of doing good for the most amount of people, wouldn't you say that there is an approach that one could take to?
Yes, and I kind of I kind of alluded to it, which is, and again, being a student of philosophy, which I am, I always have to say that an approach is an approach, right? That it's not from Mount Olympus. That my approach says, if we look at decentralization, I'm coming from a very libertarian point of view, okay? Hence, I tend to talk about this decentralization thing. And I'm giving examples from evolution. I'm giving examples from your muscles. I'm giving examples. I'm talking about anti-fragile. I'm talking about, yes, it's not very efficient, but it's the most robust system. It's a system that'll allow for 1,000 flowers to bloom and a lot of learning to happen, a lot of trial and error. In other words, try, fail, things get learned, right? That this kind of decentralization in the long run tends to result in better species, okay, stronger muscles, and better economies. That is the general outline of my argument. But it is just an argument, right? It does not, and it's not an all-encompassing argument. It's only specifically speaking about the stomach aspect of things, the economy, the sharing of the pie. It is not necessarily it's not a metaphysical argument and an argument about epistemology either. And it may not even be my moral argument, but there's something that is also very nice about because there's this thing that people tend to forget. In your pointing out of the difference between the Canadian Constitution and many European constitutions versus the American Constitution, you said that, yes, they say people have rights, but where do the rights come from, right? What's primary, right? Are the rights within you, and then the Constitution is just about saying, hey, here's what the government cannot do to you, right?
Yep, you're right.
Do to you, or is it saying this is the government, and it's gonna allow you and give you all these things?
Now, we're bestowed this land and rights from the Queen.
Objectively speaking, somebody could come from Mars and look at the results and say, but it's the same thing. Over here, you're allowed to do this. Over here, you're also allowed to do this. But in any kind of scale, especially with complex systems, and that's why, again, you cannot think of complex systems as though there were a pendulum in your physics lab. They're not. They're very, very, very crazy and tricky, okay? Complex systems do not follow linear lines. Complex systems is like, okay, even something as simple as the production of a factory. Okay, I'm going to add one more worker. I'm going to get X unit of production. So I'm going to be like, okay, that X is my scaling factor, is the slope of my line, if you will. Then I'm going to keep on adding workers. And then at some point, it may either go exponential or fall off. In other words, it's not true that if I just keep adding workers, I'm going to get it. It's going to do something that unexpected, right? So
Yeah.
complex systems,
Because there's a lot of variables in there. You might
and you
hire the
can,
wrong worker, or
and you
your
don't
the
even know.
economy may turn, or it's a whole bunch of shit that can happen.
There's some of it where
Yeah.
even if you keep all kinds of things constant, it just does something very unexpected, and you don't know why the hell it did it. We talked about one child versus 5 children, right? One child, you got him all figured out. Now you put him in, you got all 5 kids figured out individually, but when you put them together, it's a different beast. What is that? Can you map it out? Do you have a chart? Do you have a bunch of equations? No. It tends, again, this is just very simple complex systems. Systems such as foundings of the nation and keeping it together are way, 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 way more complex. So the idea is this: where you start is very important. In other words, the American system says, oh, where you start in a complex system is important. For a non-complex system, if you have a scale, let's say, and you have on this one, like the beam balance scale type stuff, like the scale of justice, right? That kind of stuff. If I put a 10-pound rock here, okay, and then I put another 10-pound rock here or whatever, it balances and it ends up in the same place, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with human activities, whether it be you as an individual or a collection of people, where you start matters. In other words, if you say the rights come from you, or if you say the rights come from the government, you're going to create a very different kind of society, right? Even though you're saying, hey, but it all ends up the same place, it's going to become a very different. Now, let me put it in a very personal way. The personal way is this: if you're balancing social obligation versus individual, let's say, focus on yourself versus focusing on your social obligations, right? And somebody says you need to balance it. So you got to put a 10-pound weight here, and then also put a 10-pound weight here, and then also put a 10-pound weight here so that things balance off. But guess what? It makes all the difference in the world what you consider to be primary. If you consider the social to be primary, you're going to be a totally different person, even though you guys balance it. Okay, you guys are going to balance it, these two different people, versus the person who considers his individual and egotistical, to put a negative connotation on it, responsibilities to be primary. He's going to, even if he balances it off, he's going to have a very different life trajectory and a very different work. One of the reasons is it's more complex than what I'm about to say, but one of the reasons is this: the thing you do first colors your vision. So if you decide to do your individual stuff first, it changes your vision of what reality of it changes your perspective. And then you then go about doing your social things in a different way. Versus if you did your social things first, that colors your vision, and then you're going to go about doing your individual things in a different way. Even though you put 10 pounds on each of it, you put $5 towards your individual progress, and you put $5 towards your social obligations. But where you put those $5 first, to simplify things, makes all the difference in the world. Okay, and now this is the longest stream on this channel so far.
Hey, sorry, man. It's quite fascinating,
Thank
man.
you. Congratulations, you're getting the award, and you've been a great interlocutor, a great person to talk about this with, and
yeah, hopefully next time I have something in my stomach, I actually form a sentence when I was pausing for 5 minutes.
So to close it out, and then I'm going to give you the last word. But to close it out, I'm just going to say again, this was a book review. Somebody talked about, well, how about I talk about books? Okay. Generally speaking, my channel is about being better and doing better, whether it comes to business, lifestyle, artistic, creative pursuits, or mastery, subjective consciousness, meditation, so on and so forth, those kinds of things. Okay. And with an emphasis on doing as opposed to the being part. Doing, do. Okay, go out there and get the work done. Go out there, fail, try, learn from the failure, try again. That kind of a thing, right? Today we talked about Authur Schopenhauer. Okay, Authur Schopenhauer is a German philosopher, lived in the 1800s, wrote this book called The World as Will and Representation, or The World as Will and Idea. Basic idea of the book is basically this. Okay, we experience the world in one hand as representation. It is always, every object always comes with a subject. In other words, it always comes with consciousness. You are the consciousness that experiences things. You are the consciousness that experiences things. This pen is within your graphical and your spatial temporal user interface. You don't know this pen other than the fact that it appears in your consciousness. In other words, you should not separate the object from you, the subject. German idealism tends to focus on the subject or the consciousness as being primary. And then the second way in which we view the world is through the will. In other words, there's a particular object that we can view from internally, that we can understand internally, that we can feel internally. In other words, you could be like, well, what does this pen feel like when it's being pulled towards my hand by gravity? What does it feel like when it lands on my hand and it feels the electromagnetic forces and so on and so forth? These are metaphysical questions. What underlies physics? Okay, it says, how about we analogize all these forces, the main forces, electromagnetic, gravitational, the strong and the weak force in the nucleus of the atom, as being very similar, although more basic manifestations, or similar to the drives that we feel. In other words, we have drives, preferences, proclivities. We have will, the will to power, the will to live, the will to will, the will, right? How about if gravity was also will, but a very much more simpler will, and that this will fighting against will is what the whole world is about. Your desire to do this versus your desire to do that. Just like the gravity is pushing the pen down towards the ground, and the will to electromagnetic resistance is keeping it from going through my hand. And that this world is just blind will against blind will doing its dance. Then from there flows, from this kind of a metaphysical point of view, flows an aesthetics and an ethics and a politics that says that the world should be lived in a way where you step out of the dance of blind wills. So, and this is best analogized through the Buddhist point of view, okay? Even though this is a German philosopher, but point of reference, since we very much are aware in the West, since we've been colonized spiritually by the East. We've been colonized spiritually by the East, and so we understand the idea that the world is suffering. Suffering is a result of your desires, and you should get out of the dance of these blind desires or the blind will pushing against each other. And I'm going to give you the last word on the channel, and then we're going to close it out by, let me see over here. I have another channel that I read books that I could get Chaos Reign. Yeah, check out Chaos Reign. Okay, check out Chaos Reign. He said he has a channel where he reads books. So go ahead, I'll give you the last word and then we'll play the song to take us out.
Man, I really appreciate you having me on, man. It's definitely been a intellectual marathon, man. I thoroughly enjoy the conversation. I mean, it's taking me to the edge of my conscious being, really. Like, it's a lot of ideas interwoven into one another, and it's kind of hard to keep everything together. But I know one thing's for sure. I definitely came out on the other side of this a bit more enlightened. So I'm just going to keep riding the wave, man. Taking that surfboard above that water, man, and straight up.
Yes. And thank you very much. And again, as Mr. I believe his name, and check out Zen Ends. Chaos Reign said, the channel where he reads the books is Zen Ends. Okay, and I think Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, "Go out on the limb, okay? Go out to the edge, because that's where the fruit is. The fruit is on the limb, right? That's where you need to be, constantly on the limb, constantly on the edge of your capacities, constantly pushing yourself in that particular direction. Because in these spaces, again, whether it be the RP spaces, the manosphere spaces, so on and so forth. This is really what it's all about. This is about you saying, okay, you want to say you're a man? Okay, well then show me your work, right?
Amen.
Amen. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and play. You know what? You get to vote. All right, you get to vote since you've been a great guest. Should we play Battle Within or do we play Run? What one of these songs, you may or may not know them, but Battle Within.
I don't know. Battle Within. I mean, it's kind of synonymous with the topic, right? You know,
there you go. And it is my theme song for the channel because I'm always talking about subjective consciousness. And yeah, these are my songs, by the way. So you guys go ahead and check out, and we've been leaving links all through the chat as far as my band Soul Rising, right? Soul Rising. And then this guy said, to play too.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I gotta get some food in me, man. I'm about to collapse over there.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Peace out. Okay, we're gonna start with Battle Within, and then we're gonna play Run. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This was an almost 4-hour stream, which is nuts. It's crazy. Shout out again to those of you who donated to the Cash App. I'm not sure if you guys are still around, but Lou, BC, Lord Smooth, definitely appreciate it. And for the rest of you guys, don't hesitate, stop by, drop, a little 99 cents in there. It's feedback. Don't worry about how small it is. The point is, you're giving feedback that says, hey, this is useful to somebody, and therefore, I'm going to go out there and continue to share, perhaps in this particular series, okay, about the books, or obviously continuing with all the other things we tend to talk about, which is about persuasion, being better and doing better in your business, how to manage your energy, how to get things done, streams of income, all that kind of stuff, right? So that you can step our game up, collectively step our game up and crush it out there. So we are out. Here comes Battle Within.
On the shore, relentless in the war, the legions in our hearts, shed waters in our balls, the spirit and the flesh, the emotions that arrest, the cerebral will contest, propelling the unrest. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand, stand up, make we burn Babylon. Guess I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. With the semblance of a blaze, with gratitude and rage, we touch another page with delirious delight, impervious to light. This vitality and might encourages the flight. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand. Stand up, make we burn Babylon. Guess I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the wind will fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demon searching. The spirit and the wind will fight the battle within. In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity if it hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what draws behind the curtain? The face of evil smirking with the shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple. Many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannon could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Conditions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners. Go. Run, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. Run for the hills, let the will lead the mind. For living is the thrill with the doubt left behind. Amidst all the wicked, there is beauty to behold. Be fearless and intrepid from the depths of our soul. The hands of the steady glees the rose from the thorn. The sweat of the weary brings the glow to the dawn. The motion of the wheel brings the light to the mind. Unchained, be aligned, it's divine. Run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling on your daughters and your sons, they can't forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling on your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. Run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. Run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated, Lord. Run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and